Welcome everyone to another episode of Cinematic Realms. I'm your host Gwen. With me, as always, is Jared, and we're joined once again by Heidi from Costume Co. How are you doing, Heidi? It's so good to have you back.
Oh, I'm really great. Gwen, thank you so much for having me back. I have so much fun. I had so much fun on the Outlander one with you and also having you on our channel. So
Yeah.
I hope we can do more of these.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And yeah, no, it's great. We missed you on the last Outlander stream, but also we were getting into some rough story material for that one.
Yeah.
So it
Yes.
was kind of good to have a different approach for that one.
I know it because
Yeah.
anytime you're talking about essay, is that what you guys call it? Essay? It's
Yeah.
very difficult, you know. I'm really sorry I missed it, but absolutely loved season one of Outlander. So I am really sorry I had to miss it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm glad you were game for this discussion because I've been looking forward
Yes.
to it for a while. And
Yeah. And I didn't know it was the anniversary. So what is it, the 45th or the 50th?
yeah, it's not exactly the anniversary, but
Yeah.
it's the anniversary was in April.
Oh,
So
okay. That's so cool.
so like, or at least the UK, like I think the UK and US release dates were different
Mhm.
for this. So it was one of the anniversaries.
That's so
But
cool.
but yeah, I wanted to commemorate it because it's like 45 years old. I When I first saw this film, it was probably around 20 years old, 19 or 20 years old. And I'm actually going to get into like why that's significant for me, but like um yeah, so I haven't even properly introduced the film for those who are watching or will tune in. We're talking about the film Excalibur today, and which I think is probably widely considered to be like the quintessential King Arthur film. There really hasn't been one that tackles the legend in the same way, and ever since there's a good amount of movies that either tackle a like a portion of the legend or
Yeah.
try to reimagine it in some way, but I feel like Excalibur is the only like major motion picture to actually attempt to take on you know the full legend as much as you can in a 2.5 hour movie. And so I think that's why after the 45 years since it's originally came out, it has kind of stood as the King Arthur movie. Um, and it's interesting because I had heard about it for years, and before I eventually saw it, and I just remember it being this movie that I always saw like in like movie stores with that really cool artwork on the cover. Because I think this does. Let me go ahead and put that up real quick. As a
Yeah,
matter
you
of
had
fact,
it on. Oh, yeah. The poster's gorgeous.
yeah, I think it's probably one of my favorite poster designs
Mhm.
ever made. It's just like, and this is only something that could have been made for a movie in the 80s, really.
Mhm. Absolutely. There
And
was a
yeah,
really great poster designs. I remember back then, like even like Star Wars, they had really, I don't know who the artists were, but there was some really beautiful poster designs. But yeah, so I saw that you had shared that on Instagram and it's just absolutely gorgeous.
yeah. I didn't use this for the thumbnail because it didn't fit, and like I couldn't crop any of this out. Like I tried, and it was like, oh my god, it just. So I actually used another one of the posters that features just Merlin, actually for the thumbnail, but it's plenty of gorgeous artwork to pick from. Um, I'm going to actually. I'm I'm so nervous and excited about what Jared's thoughts on this movie were, because Heidi, you and I have both seen this film before, but this
Yes.
was Jared's first time seeing the movie. So lay it on me, Jared. What are your impressions?
Never fear, Gwen. I did enjoy it. It was an interesting experience because I obviously do not have the same history with this movie that the two of you do. I watched it for the very first time just on Friday. And I've heard about the movie. I've seen, other King Arthur adaptations, some of which I quite enjoy. So this was always one that I'm kind of like, it's on the list. I'll get to it eventually, and there's never a better catalyst to get to it eventually than for a stream or one of these discussions. So I was looking forward to it very much. I will acknowledge that, the movie definitely probably would have left a bigger impression on me had I seen it when I was a little bit younger, because it is a movie from 1981 and has some of those conventions. And in particular, I just have to own up to the fact that once you've seen fantasy storytelling like The Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, like earlier day fantasy stories, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, there's a before and an after when it comes to this kind of stuff. Yeah. But I did, like I said, I did enjoy the story. And in terms of the viewing experience itself, I have to also own up to the fact that it was not perhaps the most ideal experience. Because I chose to watch this movie with my parents.
Wow.
Specifically because, like usually when we do these things, I watch the movie on my own. But in this case, it was my birthday week. My parents wanted to spend some time with me. My dad had seen this movie before, and so they're like, if you want company when you watch this movie, we'll watch it with you. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's do that. But I will just own up to the fact that my mother, God bless her, who is a wonderful woman with so many great qualities, I don't think she was prepared for some of the elements of the King Arthur story that had not been as popular. Because, for instance, like she has seen the 2004 Keira Knightley, Clive Owen version of King Arthur, and I think even though that one is obviously trying to be a little bit more grounded in like history and things, I think she thought she was in more for something like that. So in particular, I will just say, not to start things off on a dark note, the early scenes with Uther and his magical taking of Igraine with Merlin's assistance, she was not about that. And she was not able to keep it to herself. She was making her feelings known that this is really fucked up. And I'm like, you know what? You're 100% correct. It is fucked up. And I think the only reason that I wasn't more disturbed by it is I knew that this was part of the King Arthur story. And so I was prepared for it. But I think I probably should have done a little bit better job preparing her for that. And then in particular, she was just, making commentary about, about everything that was happening. And I was enjoying it because I enjoy watching movies with my mom. But it was definitely, she was comparing it, let's say, to other King Arthur movies that she had seen, and she was not as impressed. But eventually, we settled in and we watched the rest of the movie. And like I said, I was ultimately impressed by, as you said, Gwen, the fact that this movie was able to tell like the entire history of King Arthur, such as it is the most famous version based on La Morte Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, up to and including his final confrontation with Mordred. And for that reason, I was like, this is a very worthy entry in the cinematic canon of King Arthur. I've got to be honest, like I'm probably with my mom. I probably still prefer the Keira Knightley Clive Owen version for a number of reasons. But again, it's also because I was a prime age for that one for so many reasons, and this one I'm coming to a little bit later in life. So, but never fear, as I said, I still enjoyed the movie. I think there's lots of good stuff to talk about, including its incredibly stacked cast. But this is definitely one where I will acknowledge that your enthusiasm for it, Gwen and Heidi, will probably outstrip mine.
Well, it's interesting because, like, I've grown into my love of this movie. I should probably like step back and like explain like how I came to first watch this movie. I'm trying to remember if it was before or after Lord of the Rings had come out, the first film. I feel like it might have been shortly before, but that was the context into which I was seeing this movie. And I remember it's so funny because I remember thinking when I saw this in probably around the year 2000, 2001. And at that point, this movie was just under 20 years old. And I remember being of the opinion, this is a really dated looking movie. And it's funny because I've actually come around on that in the time that has passed. And maybe it's because I myself am older. I've been exposed to more films, and like my vantage point isn't from like what the current style of movie making is. Maybe because I prefer like an older style of filmmaking now, because now I'm, as we get older, we're like, oh, they just don't make them like they used to. And now I regard the film as having a very classical style. And it almost doesn't even feel like a movie from the 80s. I mean, in certain regards it does, because I don't think in any other decade would you get fantasy this horny. But like, I remember even when I first saw it, I was like, wow, it came out in 1981. It felt more like something that was at least from the 70s to me in sort of style. And I sort of like that now. Because it takes it out of a modern context and makes it a very classical piece of work. And in a lot of ways, maybe this is sacrilegious to Arthurian scholars, but I sort of place it on a similar pedestal to, the sort of more important Arthurian works, like anything from Le Morte d'Arthur to The Once and Future King. I think Excalibur is probably just as important a piece of the Arthurian canon because it establishes a lot, both in terms of like what it does with the story and stylistically, what the film does. And because of the fact that it takes on the whole overarching legend and yet puts its own spin on things, it's a very fantasy, work, in a way that it's less historical than even the original tales. Like I think even in Le Morte d'Arthur, like the sword in the stone, it resides in London. And in this movie, it's like you can't imagine like, London existing in the world depicted here. It feels somehow more ancient. And it's a strange movie. It's got like, I'm thinking of Trevor Jones's score, which particularly anytime that's like Merlin calls on the dragon, and it's that very bizarre ethereal singing that just makes it at times very creepy, and so I think it's a very singular work, and I have to imagine at this point, because nobody else has attempted something like it in the 45 years that it's been around, I'm not entirely sure we're going to see another like proper film adaptation do it like this. I think if anything, we might see a television miniseries or a multi-season series tackle the Arthurian legends at some point.
Yeah, like the show
But
Merlin, which I hadn't seen, but have you
yeah,
watched Merlin?
I've seen parts of
Mhm.
the I'm not sure which one you're referring to. Is it
It's
the
probably
one?
it might be from like 15 years ago. I think it's just called Merlin.
Well, there's two
Okay.
television projects called Merlin. The more recent one is kind of a more revisionist take on it, where Merlin's a young kid and
This one's it's from 2008.
yeah.
There's 5
That,
seasons. That's the
I
one. Yeah, you're right. It's Young Merlin. Apologies. Yeah.
and the Merlin that I'm more familiar with is actually this one here, which is the Sam Neill miniseries, which was
Oh, okay.
actually my first exposure to the larger
Hmm.
Arthurian mythos. Which is why I think I was probably, when I saw Excalibur for the first time, I was probably comparing it to that, which is hilarious because, again, when you're young, anything new is like more to your liking than something that is older. So, but now I look back on that and it's like, oh, that's dated because it's very clearly a TV miniseries from the 90s.
Hmm.
And Excalibur feels more grand and big and with a bigger, looks like a more expensive, production. Um, but but still, Merlin was like a very formative thing because that's the version that introduced me to, you know, things like Uther and Merlin's relationship and the and disguising him as the Duke and like Mordred and all that stuff. That I kind of first came to all that stuff through that miniseries. So that's interesting. So I feel like that and also the Disney Sword in the Stone were like my big, you know, uh, touchstones for what I understood about King Arthur. That and First Night, which is far more Hollywood, but
Oh
I
yeah,
love it the same.
yeah.
Um,
Sean Connery. That one.
yeah,
Hmm.
but over the years, I've come to like I get more and more out of Excalibur every time I watch it, and even when I first saw it and I wasn't as impressed, I still came away thinking, A, it's a freaking gorgeous movie. And B, oh my God, the music is incredible. I think it's what sort of kick-started my love of the music of Richard Wagner and as well as Carl Orff, and so it always had things that kept me coming back to it. Um, to say nothing of Nicol Williamson's performance as Merlin, which I just think is absolutely incredible. Um, so and really I feel like what solidified my love of it finally was this year they Arrow Films did the 4K restoration for the film, and it was a long, like this was long overdue because the film, unfortunately, as beautiful as it is, has never gotten the best treatment on home video, and and the new restoration is just absolutely gorgeous. I even tried to trick Jared into buying the 4K edition sight unseen, but he wouldn't go for it.
didn't work.
Because it is like I can't imagine a better way to first see the film, unless, like yourself, Heidi, you got to see it in theaters.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it just but now finally seeing the film in uh, such a glorious presentation just kind of completed the love affair that I have with the movie now. And it's an interesting case study in how our sort of perspective and tastes evolve over time. Um, And so yeah, but Heidi, I'd love to hear about your experience with the film, and
Sure.
like what you knew about King Arthur stories beforehand, and
Yeah.
or if anything.
Well, I was saying to Jared, like, so I saw it when I was 14, and I believe it was rated R. So my friend and I got in. I don't know how. Like, and this is in Winnipeg, Manitoba, when I was in high school, and we went to see it. But I don't think I knew much about it. Maybe a little bit of what I'd been taught in school. Other than that, I didn't know much about it. And it was funny because I was thinking about this, like, so as a young person in the 80s and going to see these types of films, and there would be like, questionable material, like you were talking about, like this essay, right, in the movie. And I try to remember, like, how did I sort of see things when I was younger? I guess I just didn't think that was weird. Like, I don't know. Like, my children are a lot more aware of this type of stuff now, whereas when we were younger, we didn't really maybe know, maybe because I thought it was fantasy, that was okay. I don't know. I'm trying to remember, but I remember at the time loving it. And of course, as Gwen says, it's absolutely stunningly gorgeous. And so, as Gwen knows, I did a rewatch on it recently. Actually, I looked it up. It was in August of 2025, so that I could do an analysis of the costumes, which are done by Bob Ringwood, who is the same costume designer who did Dune, like the David Lynch's Dune, which is another really great, I love a movie that I love. David Lynch kind of distanced himself from it, but in my mind, I think it's amazing. And I know most people might prefer the Denis Villeneuve one. So there's what's really interesting to me about this movie, like just watching like the behind the scenes video again, I just watched it, is everything's practical. There's no CGI. This is well before CGI. So everything they did, the green lighting, for instance, they did it with gels, or they used like that. Like, isn't that amazing? I'd never seen anything like that before. And the way it shone on the armor. And then there's a scene when, like, the wedding scene, apparently they were waiting, the whole, like, they're waiting for the light. They actually had a moment where the sun kind of came out. It had been drizzly and rainy, and because they were shooting in Ireland. And this scene, this is actually real. Like, this is actually the sunlight casting on this gorgeous armor, who is made by Terry English, this fantastic armor maker out of England. So, I had never seen anything like that before. So Gwen, even though it is dated for sure. And of course the storyline, it's questionable, maybe things that maybe they wouldn't do now. It was just absolutely stunningly beautiful. And even though the female characters, the female characters are kind of interesting in this. It's sort of like I was talking about A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. It's a kind of a male-centric sort of story. I sort of feel like this story as well. It's sort of a male-centric story. There are a couple of pivotal female characters, but I think I always look at it like the time when the story was written. You have to sort of take that into consideration. So I always want, like, George Martin's story, for instance, it's extremely sexist. It's extremely misogynistic in many ways. It's extremely violent towards women. So it's sort of, I always sort of measure that when I watch that. So that sort of, so rewatching it, yeah, it definitely felt dated, but at the same time, I still think it was so beautiful. And then the cast, I mean, this is one of the most incredible casts that you could ever bring together. In fact, many of them, this is their first time working in film. So it launched the careers of all of these, Helen Mirren and Gabriel Byrne and Nicol, is it Nicol? Nicol Williamson. He had been quite an established film actor, I believe. And the other thing that was really interesting, I read this, Gwen, I don't know if you know this, but apparently Helen Mirren and sorry, I have to look up his name here. I forgot who I'm talking about. Liam Neeson. They apparently met on this movie, and then they ended up having a long-term relationship. Like he saw her in her costume, and he was like, "Holy shit, who is that?"
Yeah, there's an interview on the Graham Norton show where
Yeah.
he's talking about the fact that he and Kieran Hines, who is also in this,
Yes, who's also in Game of Thrones, right?
who's unrecognizable in this. I couldn't believe it was him.
Totally.
But he said that they were just sort of hanging out on set, and then Helen Mirren comes walking out, and they were both like,
Yeah, she was hot. I don't know if she was wearing that. I don't know if she was wearing that metal breastplate.
Yeah, I think he said she was in full costume, because I did watch that interview clip before I saw the movie. And I'm like, I'm gonna see, like I'm clocking this, because like it was obviously Liam Neeson is an incredible actor, and so is Kieran Hines, and so is Helen Mirren. But as you alluded to, like this was all like so early on in their careers that it is kind of fun to imagine legendary, soon to be legendary actor Liam Neeson and soon to be legendary actor Kieran Hines beholding soon to be legendary actress Helen Mirren, and be like, oh yeah, look, she's got it.
Yeah, I was laughing actually in this scene. Liam Neeson's wearing a bit of a man bun.
Yeah,
I was re-looking at it. He's got like a half, kind of a bit of a Ned Stark, but it's sort of like a man bun. It cracked me up.
He was ahead of his time.
He was.
He looks. I gotta say, he actually looks a little bit like Thoros of Myr.
Yes, he does. He does look like Thoros of Myr. That's so funny.
I'm interested, Jared. Like, how many like actors did you know ahead of time were in this, and were there any like who showed up where you're like, oh my god?
Yeah, so I mean, like I knew a handful. Like I knew Helen Mirren, I knew Nigel Terry, I knew Patrick Stewart, I knew Liam Neeson, Gabriel Byrne, and Kieran Hines. So like, half a dozen. And then there were a few where I was definitely doing like the side eye. I'm like, have I seen that person in anything before? I'm sure I have, but I don't have time to go do the Wikipedia/IMDb deep dive right now. So like, but as you said, it's kind of like a who's who of a certain staple of British thespians of the time, even if a lot of them were basically babies at this juncture.
Yeah, I think there was a comment on one of the behind the scenes documentaries where Liam Neeson was like, yeah, we all thought this movie was going to make us all. And he's like, it didn't. But then it's like, I think you guys did all right, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, Gwen, so one of the things I was just remembering today, because I saw this, that apparently Nicol Williamson and Helen Mirren, they did not get along.
No, they had worked together before.
Yeah,
and they didn't get along.
Play.
So what's interesting is that's how they kind of went into this. There's a couple different versions of the story where, like, I think, one version of the story is that that's how it was throughout this production, that they did not like each other at all. But then other accounts say that they actually got on pretty well once production got going. But either way, I think even if the production started with them not liking each other, I think it helped the characterization.
Oh, absolutely. No, what I was going to say is, when I was in high school, we were studying Macbeth, the Scottish play, and my teacher at the time played a production of it, a BBC production, and I realized that it was actually Nicol Williamson. He played Macbeth. Now, I don't know who Helen played, or if she was in this particular adaptation of it, because he has such an interesting voice. Like, it's very, very different than anybody I've ever heard before. It's very baritone and has an interesting tone to it, the Merlin actor.
Yeah, for those who don't know, he actually did an abridged audiobook recording of The Hobbit, which is really interesting to listen to. So, and all of you Tolkien fans, go check that out, because it's a trip. But no, it's so funny because I was not familiar with his body of work, I was actually only familiar with him from like a pretty atrocious movie. Apologies to all those who liked the film, but even when I was younger, I was like, yeah, this is not a very good movie. It was I think it came out in the late '90s. It was an adaptation of Todd McFarlane's Spawn,
Oh.
with Michael J. White and Martin Sheen as the villain, and Nicol Williamson played like Spawn's mentor or something like that.
Mhm.
And I just remember him because he was so distinctive, and like, that voice of his is so great. And so I remembered him when I saw this film, and then even like back then when I first saw this movie, I was like, oh my God, it's like, this is not like, it's not a version of Merlin that like adheres to, to my picture of Merlin. I think like my favorite version of Merlin remains the Sword in the Stone Merlin. The Disney, and then probably Sam Neill from the Merlin miniseries, but he's just an absolute riot in this. I think I saw a comment in the chat earlier that said he was inadvertently funny. I don't think there was anything inadvertent about it. I think it was absolutely intentional that, Merlin provides a lot of humor in this film, but he's also mysterious and dangerous. And it's kind of like, I had this thought when I was watching the movie today. It's like, it's almost like he's in a different movie than everybody else.
Gwen, I have to add to what you were just saying there about him being in a stinker, because one of the things I was watching today when I was watching the behind the scenes is that John Boorman was warned not to cast Nicol, because apparently prior to doing Excalibur, all of his movies had bombed. So I don't know if he's like box office, what do they call that when you're like box office toxic, like you're, you whatever. Although I said to Jack, I said, well, you can't really blame the actor. Most times it's just like, you're in the case of Spawn, it was probably just a bad movie, right? Yeah. But anyway, John Boorman was like, no, he's my guy, and I think he was right.
And what's so funny is that Nicol Williamson like didn't want to shave his head, which was the idea that John Boorman had. So instead, they did the metal plate, which I think is absolutely brilliant, and it's iconic, and it's so 80s, which is great.
It is. And and apparently it protected him. Like something fell on his head at one point during production. Like the production, by the way, was ridiculously dangerous. There were so many things that John Boorman, typical, and I don't want to say typical director, sometimes directors want to get the shot, and that's the most important thing to them, and they'll put the actors in harm's way. And apparently something fell on his head, and but luckily, because he had that metal, it's actually aluminum skull cap, it protected his head. So he might have had a concussion otherwise.
His stubbornness paid off then.
Yeah.
Jared, I'm interested about your thoughts of Nicol Williamson as Merlin, because for me, he steals the movie. I love his performance so much.
He is most definitely like giving an outrageous performance in a very good way. I mean, like, he recognizes that he is playing one of the legendary characters in all of, storytelling canon, and he doesn't feel the need to necessarily be beholden to what people think Merlin should be. Obviously, he plays him as very powerful and someone who has a plan and someone who has like basically a kind of an otherworldly quality to him. But yet there are also just very human moments, in terms of like quiet emotion, and then just some slapstick comedy. Like I'm thinking of the beat. I don't even remember exactly what they're doing, but the beat when he's like in the river and he just like freaking falls over. And you're just like, I don't even know why that's in the movie, but it's freaking.
It was probably a mistake.
It's hilarious. But yeah, and I definitely like, there are definitely connections and associations with other versions of Merlin from other cinematic storytelling. Like in particular, I will, and this will be a recurring theme that like I have some baggage for this movie from other King Arthur adaptations I've seen, where he's talking about the fact that this his time is ending and this world will soon be done with him. And I will just own to the fact that in that moment I heard the animated Merlin from The Sword and the Stone pop in, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to Bermuda." I definitely feel like Nicol Williamson has
That's
some
hilarious.
of that energy too, but.
And even though this sorry, I'll let you resume in just a second, but I just, on that note, I just wanted to say that even though this film is largely taken from Le Morte d'Arthur, it does take from other sources as well, and in the documentaries they discuss the fact that that Merlin very much takes a lot from T.H. White's Merlin, from the Once and Future King, which includes The Sword and the Stone. So like it's those connections are definitely there.
Yeah, and that like I mean, I'd read The Once and Future King like years and years ago, so I kind of had that backstory too. But when I say that it does give an outrageous performance at times, like it never took me out of the movie. Let's say, like it always still felt like he was a character who was serving the needs of the story, and also kind of in certain respects providing a little bit of kind of an audience surrogate perspective in certain scenes. Like I love the beat where Arthur is looking after Guinevere at the dance, and he's basically like mooning over her, and Merlin has had the perspective of how his father's basically twisted infatuation with Igraine led to this whole mess, and so he's basically like, no, love is a bad idea. And then he gives the analogy about the looking at the cake is like looking at the future. Until you tasted it, what do you really know? And then of course it is too late, and then Arthur bites the cake, he's just like, too late.
Yeah.
That scene is like full of just full of gold. I've got a couple of the and quotes here. It's like, now look, I once stood exposed to the dragon's breath so that a man could lie one night with a woman. It took me 9 moons to recover, and all for this lunacy, love, this mad distemper that strikes down both beggar and king. Never again. Never.
Narrator's voice. It happened again.
Yeah.
I was laughing. I was watching this one scene today about the cookies. Like Guinevere makes these little cookies that are supposed to restore. I was wanting to know what was in the cookies. She said they're supposed to restore life, but also give, like, you kind of like, they might make you sleepy, but they probably will restore you. So I was like, what are these? Are these like hash cookies? Like, what is it that Guinevere made for Arthur?
They have a little bit of the devil's herb in there.
Yeah, she was handing them out at the party. That's pretty funny.
Oh God. Yeah.
By the way, can I also add this is so creepy. Also, I don't know if this would happen today. So the actress who played Igraine is actually John Boorman's daughter. So she was 17 when she shot that scene. And so I don't know if your mom knew that, Jared. But
he did not.
Apparently, like, both his son and daughter are in the movie.
It's good.
Yeah, it's bad enough as it was. But then Gabriel Byrne was talking about some of the scenes. Like, she laughed. She went home, and he basically was just like doing it with a pillow for like the close-ups. Where he's like, "What is going on here? Why am I doing this?" Or there's another scene where he's just standing on a ladder instead of being on a horse. And he's like, I don't understand this, because he didn't understand film. So, but yeah, he's like basically like humping a pillow.
Well, yeah, and that's like, aside from the hilarity of that, but also like so many of these actors were coming from the stage. And that lends this film a very theatrical feeling, because the acting style is very much, you can feel that a lot of the experience of the actors in this film is theatrical stage productions. Which certainly, like, if you're into that, it's worked brilliantly. If you're looking for something a bit more naturalistic, it can be off-putting, but I love it, just especially because it lends some moments to be like little unintentionally, but like comically over the top at times, and I think that just adds to the vibe of the movie. I remember I talked about this movie when I first saw it to my friend who worked with me at the news station, and he was a big fan of the film. And I said to him, like, some of the acting's a little odd. And he quoted Arthur. He's like, I love her, Merlin. I wish she'd be my queen. And
well, also I was saying to Jack, there's some ADR as well. Like,
yes,
he said, my husband, because he works in audio AV, he was saying, yeah, back then the ADR was not as good as it is now. Of course, it's almost perfect now. So it did, like, so it'll be like they'll be talking, but it doesn't match the movement of their mouth. So it just comes across as very strange and unnatural.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's not quite that bad. As a matter of fact, it's funny because there was some discussion about this newest release where I think there's a slight audio sync issue with it, which is easily fixed on most setups because you can actually fiddle with like audio delay in the player settings, so it's not really that big of an issue. But a lot of people were saying there's no issue, it's fine, because the ADR has always been shit.
Oh, okay. Well, I think they can fix that though, can't they? Can't they fix that when they do the restoration of the?
Well, it goes to whether they want to, what's revisionism versus just leaving it alone. But yeah, I found.
Yeah, so I was rewatching this scene where Arthur is on the beach with Percival, and he's telling him to take the sword and find a calm, steady pool of water and throw the sword back in, Excalibur back in. And at that point, I'm like. It's like they probably did act it, but then they had to redub it in ADR. Like, I don't really understand filmmaking like that. My understanding is that the actors are usually mic'd, but sometimes they have to do it in ADR. So I'm not really sure because of the room tone, maybe, or I'm not sure. So it doesn't come across sounding natural. So I don't know. It seemed off during that scene that I was watching.
I mean, it's because I think the entire film is ADR'd.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I know there was a reason for that, which was discussed in the documentaries. I just can't remember for the life of me what it was right now. I'd have to rewatch it. But yeah, they pretty much ADR'd the entire film. And it certainly lends a very distinctive sound to it. It's like the original audio track is even in mono. It's not even stereo. So it's just it's a totally different era. So yeah, and unfortunately it would have been really interesting because they looked for the original audio elements for the restoration to see if they could like breathe new life into it and do like a full like 5.1 new sound mix that would have maybe cleaned up a lot of that audio, but they couldn't find all the elements. So the film, but you know what? Hey, it worked in 1981. So, it's fine. But no, you mentioned that scene though, but what I always think about is, again, talking about the sort of theatricality of that movie, I freaking love that final scene has like this red sun in the background. And it's so amazing. Impressionistic.
Yeah.
I just love it.
And they're covered with, I don't know if it was this movie, but I think I read that the blood was actually not like it was more of an orange color, if I recall. So that it kind of had that glow to it, but it's just, and then of course the scene when he's on the ship and everything and it's going out to Avalon, I gather. There. Yeah. Oh, like that, I think was actually, I don't know how they did the sun though. That, because again, unless they painted it in post, they didn't have like CGI.
Well, yeah, but I think like it's probably a backdrop of some
Oh,
kind.
okay, you're probably right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I love watching movies like this where like it's things like matte paintings and miniatures and like just using all that. It's sort of it's actually what Jared and I were just recently talked about with the new Star Wars animated series Maul Shadow
Mhm.
Lord, and how like so much of the look of that show is driven by like it's not just CGI, it's a lot of hand painted techniques, and a lot of the backgrounds of the show are like intentionally made to look like matte paintings basically, and they're not striving as much for realism with the show.
Mhm.
And that's sort of what I love about older films too, is it's using this word again, it's very impressionistic, uh and it's not all about what's the most realistic looking, it's creating a vibe, and I just love that. And speaking of the vibe, I really want to talk about the music of this film, which, and chief amongst, like the pieces that stand out the most are Richard Wagner's, you know, uh, funeral march for Siegfried from the Ring Cycle, and also Carl Orff's Orff from the Carmina Burana, which is the big choral piece that plays every time they're going into battle. And like I always love movies that are driven by classical music, and the score
Mhm.
by Trevor Jones has the difficult job of like playing support to that. And but I think the first time I saw this movie, I just assumed that every piece of music was a classical piece. And so hats off to him, because he did a great job blending his score in
Yeah, I
with
think it was the same with
the rest of the
Alien.
music.
Yeah, I think Alien did the same thing. They decided to go with classical music. I think they couldn't find that right tone that they wanted. I was going to say, actually, it was really, again, looking at the behind the scenes. So John Boorman apparently went to Bayreuth, where they do, they play the Ring Cycle. They do it. I've heard they do it over a weekend, and the people who go to them are like almost like huge nerds that go to that festival. There's a name. They have a name. I can't remember what it's called, but apparently he went with his daughter to see it, and then they decided to do that. And then of course our Fortuna, which I was laughing at, because when I was in theater school, we did a dance show where we used our Fortuna, and we changed the words to "I had some lunch and it was good. I had a can of tuna," and we changed the lyrics to the song. Jared, do you know what I'm talking about? When they're going through the cherry blossoms. Dun, dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun. Actually, I think they also use it in The Exorcist, if I have it right. I think they use it maybe in Exorcist too.
They do, because it's
Yeah.
a like it evokes that classic like medieval like choir ancient
Yeah.
kind of feeling.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
one of the most overused
Oh, for sure.
pieces of music ever, because of how epic it is. But it was still pretty novel, at the time of its use here. And if it showed up in The Exorcist 2, that makes sense, because that was also a John Boorman film, which was
Oh my
not
gosh.
well regarded.
Oh,
And
I
I've
loved
never
it. I
seen
loved
it.
Exorcist
So,
too. Oh no, sorry, I've got it wrong. Not The Exorcist. Omen. That was funny that I said Exorcist 2.
okay.
Yeah, Exorcist 2 is definitely a stinker. It's super weird. There's a scene in it. Do you remember they had the locusts or something, and they were doing trying to get rid of the locusts?
I've never seen it.
It-
And after all the shit that got talked about it in some of the interviews on the new edition of Excalibur, I'm like, yeah, I'm probably not in a rush to check it out.
No, sorry. I think that was weird. That was like a Freudian slip that I said The Exorcist, because you're right. No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It is like, I actually think it is often associated with the Exorcist, but it's not part of the official soundtrack there. It's just that
Sure.
the Exorcist soundtrack does have several choral pieces that sound a lot like the Commedia Burana, because yes, And obviously, the original Exorcist is a classic of horror cinema. The sequels, not so much.
Yeah. What's interesting is that, but the music has been used like so many times in other films and trailers, and even to the point that like James Horner, who is sort of infamous for being inspired by classical music. I love his music regardless. Did a take on it for the film Glory, which is a unique piece of music unto itself. It's for the final charge, but it is undoubtedly inspired by the Carmina Burana. So, it's So
Wait, by the way,
the music has made its way around.
This is totally off topic, but I haven't been in this symphony in years. But my sister got my son and I tickets to. It's called Symphonically Spielberg. So it was all of John Williams' movies that were Spielberg movies. So Star Wars sadly wasn't in it, but it was so cool. Like, E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark and all these iconic sort of soundtracks of our lives. And why my sister got them for my son and I is because my son, his high school teacher is a huge John Williams fan. So I'm sure John Williams, hugely, like the Planets, for instance. I don't know if you guys know the score of the Planets, the classical piece, but it's very much, I'm sure, influenced George Lucas for his Star Wars soundtrack.
Yeah. I think even and Gladiator takes quite a bit from the Planets as well.
So who's the composer? Gustav.
Yeah, it's if you listen to the first arena fight in Gladiator, there's parts that almost feel like they're directly copied from Holst. So
yeah, Gustav Holst, that's it.
Which I'm fine with, because nowadays composers have a habit of copying Hans Zimmer instead of classical music. I preferred it when they were copying classical music.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so
by the way, I was going to mention that today I went, the cherry blossoms are in kind of full bloom right now. So that scene where they're charging through the cherry blossoms, oh my gosh. And then the flowers are just sort of floating in the air and falling down almost like snow while they're playing Carl Orff. And then of course their armor again. And by the way, in Ireland, I know they did use green gels, but all of that green, like just reflecting in their armors, their silver armor.
It's throughout so much of the film, until really you get to towards the end when the land is fading, because Arthur is unwell and he and the land are one. But if you look throughout so much of the rest of the film, you've got that green light, which is just so beautiful, the way it's reflected off the armor and and through the windows and everything. It's one of my favorite aspects of the cinematography of the film. And yeah, it's just a breathtaking looking movie. But Jared, I just wondered if you had thoughts on and any of the stuff we've been talking about, particularly like the music and how you thought that worked within the context of the movie.
No, enjoyed the score, and particularly the use of tracks like the Carmina Burana O Fortuna, just because you're right that it has developed a reputation for being overused. But the thing I always go back to is it's like sometimes people hold that against the movies that originally did it, and they're like, oh, and we're like, this movie is the reason the tropes exist, guys. It's not actually calling into the tropes. But I did want to shout out, because Gwen, you just brought up the cinematography, and I will note that I was aware that this movie actually did get Oscar nominated for cinematography. It was its one nomination by the famous Alex Thompson. And I really was impressed by the cinematography, primarily for the reasons, Heidi, that you mentioned, that they were essentially having to capture all of this in camera and not relying on, visual effects or digital trickery afterwards. So like, I think this movie makes great use of things like shadow and fog and interesting camera angles and even like the water effects, in order to make it look like kind of a living, but also kind of hazy, like historical period piece. Because, one of the things that this movie does, I think, quite effectively, as you mentioned, Gwen, is that like it does kind of feel like a movie that's kind of operating like out of time in a lot of ways, because it does have that fantasy like overture to it, even though it's ostensibly, supposed to be like based on like, history, but like the King Arthur mythos obviously has basically passed into legend, and it feels kind of like this is a movie and a story that is essentially looking through the distant mist of time at kind of what could, what that time could have been like, because of course this takes place during what we would consider the Dark Ages, and we don't have a lot of reliable documents about what life was really like in those times, other than it was probably pretty hard. And so that's what's given kind of the appeal of these King Arthur stories of like that were originally passed down in this oral tradition before they were eventually written down and kind of eventually took on this larger than life quality. And I think the movie's cinematography kind of does speak to that quality, even though like, yes, like if you hold it up to modern day cinematography, fantasy cinematography against something like, say, The Lord of the Rings, obviously, like to our modern eyes, it's not going to look quite as impressive, but for its time and its day, like I think it's incredibly impressive work.
Mm-hmm. I would even like, I even push back on that a little bit. I don't even think that it's not to put you on the defensive, because in a certain sense I agree with
no, I mean,
you.
I hear what you're saying, but it's just the truth. The truth of the matter is that like this movie was made in 1981, and since then there have been 40 years of evolution in cinematography. Mm-hmm. So like it looks like a movie that was made in 1981. In terms of the way it's staged. But that, again, like I try not to hold movies that were made at a different time up against modern things and say like, oh, well, that means it's not as good. I'm like, clearly, because there are movies, I think, from like the 1930s and the 1940s that I think hold up incredibly well.
Yeah. There's just something about the way it looks that is... because again, I think part of it is the fact that like everything's in camera and and it's shot on film, not digital, and mm-hmm. And there's a inherent sort of rawness to things captured on celluloid, but also there's a beauty to it where practically any frame of this movie looks like a piece of art, and I'll admit that like I find this much more like impressive than, I'll just be honest, the vast majority of digital productions in modern times. There's obviously exceptions, but and then this is the part where I just talk about how I'm getting older and grouchier about the sort of the trends in cinematography. But I love the magical quality of of how this film looks, and particularly with this new restoration, which I'm just I keep holding that up as like a no. I've got a very fancy edition of this movie, but like it just breathes so much life into the cinematography that it is just breathtaking to look at, and like the stuff that like we were talking about, the reflective green colors and the shininess of the armor and all that just pops off the screen, mm-hmm. particularly in the restoration. And It's when I love the use of like HDR on 4K presentations, because it really allows stuff like that to shine. So yeah,
and
go
good.
ahead.
I was going to add actually. I don't know about Peter Jackson, but I did read that Guillermo del Toro was hugely inspired by this movie. I think I read that several directors have cited this as one of their favorite movies. And so even if, they don't necessarily use the particular techniques or what have you, some of that will flow through their work, like I did an interview the other day with a designer, and we were chatting about how cinema informs fashion and then fashion informs cinema. So it's kind of like it kind of flows both ways, sort of like when what you were talking about, classical music might inform scores, and but then maybe scores might inform other scores or have you. So I always think it's sort of interesting when you see, like Quentin Tarantino, for example, he's a huge nerd, right? He loves cinema, like he's massive lover of cinema. So it's always interesting to see like who is inspired by what. And then when you go to look at their work, then you say, oh, yes, I can kind of see that there's that hint of it there. So I do wonder, though, with someone like Peter Jackson, I'm just thinking in terms of, there's a scene at the end where, the war is all over, and then you have to remind me. It's Liv Tyler and
Arwen.
Arwen, yeah. And then they're reunited together, and the way the light is all done, and they're wearing their the silver, and the way it shines. And I was like, it kind of feels like he might have kind of been inspired by Excalibur in that scene. Like, I don't know. I could be completely wrong, but I just sometimes, yeah, go ahead.
Even if it's not intentional, like that stuff seeps into your subconscious. Like I think it's probably inevitable. It's probably inevitable for anybody who grew up in the era of this movie to, like, particularly if you're making a fantasy film, like that has to be somewhere in the recesses of your mind. So yeah, that does not surprise me. I know one of the sort of most vocal filmmakers to talk about what an impact this film had on them actually is Zack Snyder.
Who, for 300, right?
Cites it as like, I think it's a quote of him saying he thinks it's like still the perfect meld of mythology and movies. Which, I can definitely see why, he would make that comment, because like I said earlier, I think that there is something very mythological about this movie that sort of, for my money, even if it's not your favorite King Arthur movie, I think it sort of undoubtedly stands as a major work in the canon, and because it has the feeling of a piece of mythology. And I think the longer it's around, the more it feels like that. So, but yeah, I think there's even a bit in Batman versus Superman where instead of his Bruce and his parents coming out of a traditional theater, they're coming out of a movie theater that was showing Excalibur. It's got it on the marquee.
That's really awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I have reservations about Zack Snyder. He's not like one of my favorite filmmakers, but I love hearing him talk about movies, because I think at heart he's a big old movie geek, and so that's the thing. Like, it's always, not to digress, but like, a lot of his fan base not that great. In my opinion, but like that couldn't be more different from the man himself, because he just seems like a really, really nice guy. So, but yeah, let's talk about some of the individual performances. We talked about Nicol Williamson as Merlin. I want to talk a little bit about Nigel Terry as Arthur. Because what's interesting is I do have a couple of quibbles with his performance as younger Arthur. I think maybe was a bit too old to pull that off. But I think once he gets past that and he's playing the more mature Arthur, I think he's absolutely splendid. And Nigel Terry has, long been one of my like favorites. I kind of, I don't know if I'd call him underrated because he was always extremely well respected as an actor, but I feel like aside from this film, he was never super in the limelight, but I always noticed him when he was in a movie, and he's just one of those great theater actors, and so it was nice to see him be able to take on the role of King Arthur. But I particularly love some of his later scenes in the film, particularly like once you get, I think that final scene with Guinevere is masterfully acted. I think she's brilliant in that, and so yeah, but it's a tall order to play Arthur pretty much at every age of his life, and to have one actor pull that off, like, maybe it doesn't
I don't think
always
they would do
work
that nowadays. I don't think they would do that. I think they would have, they would cast different actors, I believe.
Yeah.
Or DH.
But yeah, so and plus, these early scenes when like Arthur is pulling the sword out of the stone, I was like, that's not Arthur from the Disney movie. And so that was perhaps a little unfair of me, but again, like once he, ages up into the, King Arthur, I think like I think that frees him up to do a bit, to go more into his natural talents as an actor, and I think he does a great job.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely, I was a little distracted by him playing the younger version of Arthur. It definitely had because I believe he was like in his mid 30s when he was doing this movie. So it definitely had that old actors in their 30s trying to play teenagers on a high school show, right? Energy. And it was and some of the dialogue didn't really help it, because when he was in particular, like when he after he pulls the sword from the stone, and then he's at first taken aback by it, but then when he's very much hopping into the idea that, like, of course I am now the king kind of vibes, I was just like, this feels a little off. But I completely agree with you, Gwen, that once he actually gets to settle into being King Arthur and playing him not only in his prime but then in his later years, after he falls ill, and then when he comes back for the final climactic scene, then I thought he actually gave like one of the best performances in the movie. In particular, I really love we're hopping around, but I really love the scene when he reunites with Guinevere in the convent.
Yeah, agreed.
And like that, I think that might actually be my favorite scene of his in the entire movie. And just the kind of, because the regret he's able to convey of this man who has essentially been gifted with this great destiny, but it has had a very human cost on him in terms of not only his relationship with the woman he loves, but also just his ability to essentially express that love as a man and not as the king. Like, there's that earlier scene where like he can't be the one who defends Guinevere's honor because he feels he needs to sit in judgment as the king, even over his duty as her husband. And he's trying to be fair there, but it ends up kind of essentially, costing him the fact that like he is unable to put love before duty. The whole like love is the death of duty / sometimes duty is the death of love dynamic. And I think that his inability to, or unwillingness to defend Guinevere there, is kind of what drives Guinevere temporarily into Lancelot's arms. But when he essentially recognizes later in life like his mistakes and his failings, even as this legendary figure, and he's talking to her about the essentially I want to pull up the speech where he says, "I've often thought that in the hereafter of our lives, when I owe no more to the future and can just be a man, we might meet. You'd come to me, claim me yours, and know that I am your husband. It is a dream that I have." Like, that's just great acting.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, it breaks my heart that beat in between. When he takes a beat before he says, "It is a dream I have." That's just so heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, I love that scene so much. It's beautiful. Heidi, did you have any more thoughts on Nigel Terry?
No, I agree, and I love that scene as well. I actually, yeah, like it. I think what happened with his youthful self is I sort of parked that any kind of misgivings I had, because I sort of understood it. I sort of, grasped that this is how they decided to tell the story. They could have hired a younger actor, like they did with what's the other actor's name? Margaret.
Where they had Charlie Boorman, actually John Boorman's other kid,
Mordred. Sorry, yeah, they had a younger and then and then the adult version. They transitioned it. It was, by the way, this is sort of funny too. The actor who played Robert Addy is the adult version, and then it was John Boorman's son who played him when he was younger. He was saying he cast him because he didn't have to pay him, but he thinks that he was trying to figure it out. He's like, either they cast Mark Addy because he also had blonde hair, or they just put me in because I kind of could pass for Mark Addy's younger
You just
version.
made the same mistake that on the internet I saw somebody referred to Robert Addy as Mark Addy, and it's
did I say Mark? You know why?
Wrong Addy.
You know what, right? Yeah. Sorry. This is so fun. Yeah. So Robert Addy. No, this is weird because I was like, are they related? But it's actually spelled differently. Mark Addy is Addy, and Robert Addy is Addi and E. And like many of the folks who worked on this movie, they all smoked, and a lot of them died because they smoked like chimneys. They're British actors, right? So some of them, I don't know what happened to Nicholas Clay, who played Lancelot. He died quite young. I think it was cancer.
He died in 53.
That's heartbreaking because, which, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and cite like Nicholas Clay as one of the most beautiful actors, or just most beautiful people ever born.
That's what Cherie was saying about him. Cherie Lunghi.
Yeah, it's interesting because also he appeared in the '98 Merlin miniseries.
Oh, no way!
As Leondegrance, Guinevere's father, which is
that's crazy. Yeah,
twisted. But yeah, it was another case where he made an impression, even though he's got a pretty small role in that. And then I saw him in this, and maybe because it was another King Arthur movie, I'm like, oh, hey, I recognize that guy. And no, I think he's great as Lancelot. I don't think I gave him enough credit, like when I first saw this, because funny enough, like my mental image of Lancelot was Richard Gere.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah,
from First Night, so I was always comparing him to that. And
also in that movie, there's quite an age difference between Sean Connery. Like he's a much older King Arthur, whereas in this, they're pretty much the same age, right? They're best friends.
I think like that serves the double purpose in First Night. One, because if you can get Sean Connery to play King Arthur, you get Sean Connery to play King Arthur. But also because it also lets Guinevere off the hook a little bit, because it's like, she's got the older guy, even if it is Sean Connery, but then she's got the young hunky.
Who played Guinevere in that?
Julia Ormond.
Oh,
Julie
Julie
Ormond.
Ormond. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was closer in age to Richard Gere, whereas
Yeah.
in this, like Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere are all kind of the same age, right? So, by the way, someone in the comments said that they thought that the actor who played Lancelot came across as gay. And I have to say, there was this thing that I saw recently where they're like, it's not gay, it's they're British. Like, and I'm saying this because I'm watching a show right now with is it Michael McFadden? And he's putting on an American accent. And I said, is he gay? And Jack says, no, he's married. And I said, oh, maybe it's because he's British.
Well, it's funny. Like, I don't want to I feel kind of bad about making assumptions about British actors because, yeah, it is like a long-standing thing. But and I've been watching Ted Lasso a lot, and I saw an interview with the actor who plays Roy.
Roy Batty or Roy. Yes, he's the showrunner as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Rick Goldstein is the actor's name.
Yeah.
And because he's not as aggressive in real life, he's more soft-spoken. I was like, there was a part of my brain that went.
Yeah, because he's on Shrinking.
He's not. You know,
I know it's this British accent, you know, it's very
British
gentle.
thing, so if you're not like an extremely gruff British person, that's where your mind goes. I feel really guilty about that.
I know, and me too. Yeah. So I was watching, I think it's Matthew McFadden. Am I getting that right? Matthew McFadden. Do you guys know what I mean?
Yeah, but he's Darcy, so I just always
well, that's what exactly like he's Mr. So he's Mr. Darcy in Sense and Sensibility, or sorry, in Pride and Prejudice.
The 2005 Pride and Prejudice that is a staple of both Gwyn and Mice.
Yeah, no, I know, but and I never thought it before, but I'm watching a show right now called the what is it, the tiny housewife, or the
miniature wife,
the miniature wife, and he plays her husband, but he puts on an American accent. So I've never thought it before, but with an American accent, I was like, is he gay? I was like, and husband's like, no, he's married. And I'm like, okay, it must be because he's British. So this is what I'm wondering about Nicholas Clay. But apparently he was a very, very lovely person, like just an incredibly kind, gentle, sweet person. So, but also, and non-threatening. There's a scene where he's riding along with Guinevere, where he says, I will love you. I will love you as like a friend, like I can't exactly remember the speech.
As my queen and the wife.
As my queen, as your protector and all of these things, but I will never love you in that way, right? But of course
that's what his words say. But
that's what his words say.
The way he says it,
yeah,
it gives her like, oh my God.
Yeah, she's kind of like, oh.
But I still think like they would have been okay because there's always going to be some awkwardness there, but I think like Lancelot was resolved on. I'm not going to try anything, but damn, Morgana had to go, messing.
Oh yeah, she's sort of like I'm watching a show right now called From, and you just need to just plant a seed, right? You just need to plant a little seed of doubt, and that's all it takes. I mean, this is why gossip is so horrible, right? Because it just creates this, and then she got the Gawain involved as well. So it's very clever of her, actually, when you think about it, to achieve the goals that she wants to achieve.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to be too hard on Gawain for
well, she's glamoring him, kind of, right? She's using kind of glamour.
Well, falling victim. Well, I don't know if it's so much a glamour, just like appealing to Gawain's hormones, and and like there's a deleted scene where that has there was a sex scene between the two of them. So like,
and Liam Neeson's not acting in that. he's like, okay, let's go.
Yeah, so like, I'm not gonna blame anybody for falling
Mhm,
victim to Helen Mirren.
mhm.
But yeah, it's he plays right into her hands and does the dirty work for her basically.
Yeah.
But I want to pause for a second and go back to you, Jared, since we've first get your thoughts on Nicholas Clay as Lancelot, and then I think we're ready to go into talking about Helen Mirren after that.
So I really thought that Nicholas Clay as Lancelot was another like very strong member of the ensemble. And because even among this group of like legendary like knights, like Lancelot is supposed to be the best of them. And so the kind of the way that he's presented, his armor is very nicer and well put together, and he, as Heidi mentioned, also like it probably embodies the most of like the knightly's chivalric virtues in terms of like he's more respectful of women than a lot of the other knights are, and he is very honorable in combat, even though Arthur indulges in a bit of dishonor to defeat him. Like
Yes.
once he does, like Lancelot is fully devoted to him, and their bond feels very sincere. And I get the sense that he is a character who ultimately he is a tragic figure in many ways, because his great sin, such as it is a love for is a very pure love for this woman who just happens to be his queen and married to his liege and his best friend. So it's and by our modern sensibilities, we don't really consider that to be as sinful, as especially before they decide to act on it. Once they do, like that kind of takes on a different context. But like when it's just kind of this longing between the two, like you definitely feel that like the chemistry between them, like between him and the actress who plays Guinevere, Cherie Lunghi, just because they like the way they look at each other, like in this scene. By the way, I love Patrick Stewart's smile here. He's great, but like
he's completely like not even catching what's going on in this.
Yeah,
I don't even think he's that much older than that group. Like he might have been a little bit older, but he's playing the dad, right?
He's bald, so
He's bald,
as I can attest to, like that makes me look older.
Patrick Stewart is immortal. But in particular, the longing between Lancelot and Guinevere in that scene, and then the moment when Lancelot, after having kind of his tortured vision of what what his love for Guinevere might mean, and then when he comes to defend her honor and defeats Gawain, and then in the aftermath, he's a little bit. Still tortured by like the implications of what he just did in terms of his actions, and then when he leaves, and of course Guinevere, like Guinevere is going to go after him at that point, but their love scene
shot of her at the table, where she's just kind of like, all right, how quickly can I discreetly?
But the thing is, you have, from a woman's perspective, though, you have to realize that the punishment for infidelity would have been extremely severe. Like I think they would have killed her even. I'm not sure exactly if they explain it, but usually that's what it would have been.
Yeah, and they do hint at that when Arthur has the scene with Merlin on the battlement, and even though he has been staunch in believing Guinevere's honor, once he recognizes that what Merlin warned him, that she's going to fall in love with somebody else, and he's like, "You warned me about this. What do I do now? Do I kill them?" Because that would be what is expected, but of course he loves them both and doesn't want to kill them. And their love, again, feels very sincere in that moment when they're coming together in the forest, in amidst like natural beauty and stripping away all the artifices of society and being like, there really should be nothing wrong with this. But of course, because of the times and the conventions that they are bound to, it becomes kind of a dark moment for that supposedly lets evil back into the kingdom because, of course, Morgana takes advantage of it. But I also want to note, just in terms of focus up on Nicholas Clay's performance, like when he comes back later and he's kind of like, renounced his knightly virtues, I did not recognize that was him when he's throwing Percival in the
Yes.
in the lake. I did a double take when he came back like later on the battlefield. I was like, oh shit, that was him, because now he looks very different. But his death scene was still very moving to me.
Well, I think it's one of the interesting things about the sort of the narrative about this film is that it really doesn't give you like indications of how much time has passed, except like you have to pay attention to like the fact that you have Mordred growing up to full grown adulthood to let you know that the knights have been on the Grail quest for decades. And so when you all of a sudden see haggard, older looking Lancelot, like it makes sense. But if you're not like, but because of the way the film is edited and because it's covering so much within a shorter span of time, it can kind of catch you off guard if you're not sort of really thinking about how much time has passed. So but yeah, I remember initially seeing that and I was like, oh, that's a look. That's a choice.
I was going to say, but Nicholas Clay also just about his look versus Nigel Terry. Like Nigel Terry, like if you look at it from a 1981 setting, Nicholas Clay would have been considered a hottie. Like I think in maybe 2026, maybe not as much. Like maybe his aesthetic isn't, but for 1981, I think Nicholas Clay would have been considered a hottie, whereas Nigel Terry, his Arthur wouldn't have been as attractive. So even though, like I said, they're kind of the same age and, one is the king and one is his knight, the idea is that she would be like, oh, obviously he is very chivalrous, incredibly so. So that's what sealed the deal. But he's also extremely attractive. So that's one of the reasons why I think Nicholas Clay was cast as Lancelot. I haven't seen anything in the behind the scenes, but just aesthetically, like I was just thinking of some of the stuff, like some of the movies from the 70s and the 80s, like, Lee Majors or just those particular actors, they have a particular look about them. Arnold Schwarzenegger, maybe a bit. Where they're kind of strong and maybe kind of handsome, but it has like a particular look about it compared to maybe what we would think of as being really handsome in our timeline. Like people who are considered handsome now by the general public are completely different than when I was a teenager, if that makes sense. So I think he would have been, and the other thing that makes me kind of laugh when Gwen was showing some of the close-ups is he's wearing a ton of makeup. It's like, they don't really do that anymore because we have high resolution. So,
but also again, like, just because the film is very stylized and so it works in its favor because the whole film has this very, sort of, not in a bad way, but it has the cinematography has like a soft glow.
Totally. Yeah.
So, and so, yeah, that works in its favor to have him.
Well, and oftentimes they would use full makeup on men to kind of just even out the skin tone and just give it, and the light would cap, same with the women, like they would do. So sometimes men, but I can see he's even wearing kind of a bit of a lipstick, in some of those close-up scenes. So, yeah. Whereas in Star Wars, like for instance, I don't think the men are wearing makeup. Like I'm pretty sure they're not. If they are, maybe some powder. So even though that was, 77, this is 81. Same with, I think the Dune, I think that Kyle MacLachlan probably was wearing some makeup, if I recall, just remembering looking at it. So, so that's sort of my thoughts on Nicholas Clay. He has that sort of 1981 handsome, hero love interest kind of look about him. But I thought his acting was really good too. I thought he was a very good actor.
Yeah, again, big stage actor.
Mhm.
So like his delivery of his lines is just feels like theatrical in a really great way. It's it's a very especially his acting is a very sort of classical style, and I like that. And I was just I was going to make the comment when we were talking about how chivalrous Lancelot's in this, and maybe that's another reason why the commenter said they thought he was gay, because he was far too chivalrous to be a straight guy. Sorry, Jerry.
Yeah. Because I was going to say, like, even all of the other male actors, they've never been like kind of like, even though I think, I've always thought, sorry, I was going to say, I've always thought Gabriel Byrne is handsome, but we would never I don't think anybody would say Liam Neeson, Gabriel Byrne, maybe Patrick Stewart. I don't think we would ever put them on like, Hollywood's hottest list or whatever. They're kind of like attractive actors, but I wouldn't put them as, like a Jude Law. I wouldn't put them in a Jude Law sort of era.
But also, I think you'd be more likely to find them on those lists nowadays.
Maybe nowadays,
yeah.
But back then, I don't think so. Especially Kieran Hines, like he would not have been. He would not have been considered a hottie.
Which, by the way, I just want to stress again, like how different Kieran Hines looked. I did not know that was him, because it's like,
crazy.
It's not just like that he's, he is much slimmer in this, but his face is like has a different structure to it, and
he's completely unrecognizable.
Yeah. So I remember.
By the way, he's in one of my favorite. He's in one of my favorite Jane Austen adaptations. It is. Oh my gosh, now I've forgotten what it's called. Let me look it up. And it's one of Jane Austen's later books. I have to look it up. You guys keep talking. I'll look it up.
I'll just say that, like, even though I had seen him in other things, like, for me, the thing I saw him in that I was just like utterly blown away by was Rome, where he played Julius Caesar. For me, like, he'll always be that character, even though, like, and it's not like he's a great guy in that iteration, but you at least, like, you have empathy for his character. I just finished watching for the first time Spartacus, the TV series. And
Justin loves that.
With that rendition of Julius Caesar, I just wanted awful things. Like I wanted an awful fate to, even though there were times where you definitely felt for his character. For the most part, he was a total asshole, and I just I'm hoping that, like, I'm watching the new series now, and I see that, like, that Caesar is also in that, but this series is like an alternate history thing. So I'm really kind of hoping he meets a really terrible end, aside from the one he met historically.
Sorry, the adaptation I was talking about is Persuasion. It's probably, I don't know what year. He plays the love interest in it, though. So he's the ship's captain who wants to marry.
That would be interesting too. Because
it's so good.
He always plays someone who's very gruff, or or he's a villain, or so. I will say one of my favorite performances of his is actually in the film Munich. I don't know if you guys have seen that. He's absolutely stellar in that.
He's excellent in that. The Persuasion came out in 1995, which ironically is the same year the Ang Lee Sense and Sensibility came out. So I think it got a little overshadowed. But
Captain Wentworth, that's his character's name.
Captain Wentworth. But like it reminds me a little bit of like basically Alan Rickman's role in that movie, where he's like, you wouldn't think of them as a traditional romantic lead, but they're such good actors, they pull it off. for this movie, for the purposes of Ciarán Hinds, I agree with Gwen. Like, I knew Ciarán Hinds was in this movie because of the anecdote where he and Liam Neeson were starstruck by Helen Mirren. But I was watching. I'm like, where the hell is Ciarán Hinds? And that maybe the guy got like most of the way before the movie was like, oh, that was him. Yeah, he's much younger.
Yeah, because I don't think American audiences knew him. I bet you most people didn't even know who he was until Game of Thrones. Like, I bet you most American audiences. But like I said, I had seen him in Persuasion.
I think he broke through with Rome.
Oh, okay. So I hadn't seen that show. Is that an American show, the Rome show?
It was it was a joint HBO and BBC production, but it was very big in the States, and there was a whole big
Persuasion was A&E or something.
There was a whole big thing about when Rome, because initially, because I think BBC pulled out their funding after the first season, so they had to wrap up the show in a second season, even though they originally planned for 5 seasons, and there were a lot of people upset about that at the time. I think they still did a pretty admirable job wrapping it up, but yeah, I dream about what that show could have been at 5 seasons, but it's still fantastic, and that was also the first time I ever saw Tobias Menzies in anything. He plays Brutus.
Oh, yes,
and he's absolutely astonishing. It's like
I think Outlander was the first time I guess no, Game of Thrones would have been the first time I'd seen him.
Well, it's funny because when you traditionally think of the character Brutus in relation to Julius Caesar, you kind of, he's normally portrayed as an all-out kind of villainous character, and Tobias just portrayed him with such softness and affection for Caesar, which just makes the twist of the knife, no pun intended, and just all the more grueling, because he's so conflicted about what he does. And so I remember seeing him in that, and then he wasn't in very much for years and years after that until Game of Thrones. And then he started getting cast in a lot of stuff, including Outlander. So yeah, I'm so happy with the success he's found. But anyway, I digress. Let's talk before I don't want to leave her out as one of the main parts of the story, but let's talk about Cherie Lunghi as Guinevere. Which, and this does go to what you were talking about, Heidi, that the female characters probably don't get, I mean, Morgana is a pretty juicy role, but Guinevere is kind of left to, this isn't 2004 King Arthur. Guinevere isn't getting in on the action. Well, some action. But still, I think she gives a pretty good performance. I particularly like on more recent viewings, I've really loved the early stuff between her and Arthur, because I think they have to lay a lot of foundation in a very short amount of scenes. And, you joked about the cookies and stuff, but I think all that stuff is really good. And I think when she's
just the healing,
when she's sewing him up and she's like, you'll have to stay here. And he's like, oh, for how long? A few days at least. And so I think
it rings true though, because, you're thinking about it, if Arthur is meant to be a teenager, this is he's just completely smitten with her. And I really think that I think she did a great job. Again, I think in this case, they went with somebody who I think she would be a classic beauty. That's, I think, how I might describe her. I don't know how you would both describe her.
This is I think about scenes like the scene between her and Arthur after Arthur says that he can't defend her and that Lancelot is the one that has to do it. It cuts to a scene of them in the bedroom, and again, I think it's the music is Wagner music from Tristan and Isolde. And it's like very melodramatic, and because of like the hairstyles and the costumes and stuff. This is why to me it feels like a movie that's much older than it actually is. It feels almost like something, you know, plucked out of like an old like Romeo and Juliet or something like that, with the melodrama. And so it works for me. I like it. It's not like from modern sensibilities, you're like, oh, this feels dated and older, but I think keeping in mind when the film was made and like what it was doing, I actually have a lot of affection for how, like, again, the word I like to use for it is classical it feels. And so so yeah, I think it all kind of depends on your perspective on things, and I think that her sort of, you know, having her cast with like, you know, the sort of bigger hair and, you know, the style of acting, again, it goes to, you know, feeling like a much more classic form of like cinema and cinema acting. So but yeah, there's no doubt.
And again,
like
in the 80s, hair, like big hair was a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always what kind of gives away a historical movie is the 80s. The hair and the makeup always kind of like it's a dead giveaway. But I also think I'm imagining for John Boorman when he was casting her, he's like, well, I've got Morgana who is blonde, and then of course his daughter is blonde playing Igraine. So he probably wanted a brunette. And well, actually, Julie Armand's also a brunette, if I recall, right? You said she played Guinevere in the
in First Night, yeah.
In First Night, yeah. So, yeah, but they, you know, she's got the ringlets, and it's very big. But she's also but she has the bluest of eyes, though. That's one thing I picked up on, and also I think Nicholas Clay also has. They both have very blue eyes.
I also want to shout out in the '98 Merlin miniseries, Guinevere is played by none other than Lena Headey.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, but yeah. Any thoughts, Jared?
Yeah, no. I mean, I thought that Cherie Lunghi did a very good job with the role of Guinevere as written. You're right that like this is a case of the movie kind of showing its age, where like if this movie were being made today, that modern audiences would undoubtedly want a little bit more from Guinevere's perspective in terms of how does she feel about this situation that she's in, like, because I do think that she does love Arthur. It's just that, you know, the love is probably not the all-consuming passion that she ends up feeling for Lancelot. There's the scene again I love in the convent where she talked about the fact that, you know, she tells Arthur like, "I loved you as my king." And sometimes as my husband. And that, you know, part of it was, I think the fact that Arthur oftentimes had to put his duty as king over his duties to her as a husband, even though he clearly, you know, loves her sincerely. But that's the kind of like source of drama that I think a more modern movie probably would have, you know, given a little bit more to Guinevere's perspective. But with the role as written, I think Cherie Lunghi does a really admirable job, again, not only conveying kind of her earnestness and the fact that she's kind of a counterpoint again to the character of Morgana, whose villainy is ultimately revealed. You know, she has kind of an almost like a baby face quality to her, like kind of like a, you know, she does like, I think she's a beautiful woman, but she's definitely not like to Heidi's, she's not like supermodel level gorgeous. No, like she looks like a realistic beauty would look like, you know, in like medieval times, you know, and I think that she actually like conveys
like, look
a
at her
lot
eyes. So she's got these really like ice blue eyes, you know, and then that curly hair.
Yeah, it's really funny. I find that, you know, there's a lot of sort of my favorite sort of you know, 80s movies that like, and I'm sure there's, you know, probably examples on the other end of the spectrum, but I feel like you had a lot of movies in the 80s that showcased more quote unquote natural beauties instead of a more sort of, you know, as Jared put it, kind of like a supermodel look or anything. I'm thinking of like you know, I think the original Highlander is an example of that, and you know, and I'm sure there's other examples. I'm just those are the ones I'm thinking of right now, and it's like I just feel like things have shifted over time where you know it's like, you know, and maybe part of it is, you know, sort of, you know, society's, you know, beauty standards have shifted, and you know, and all that stuff, but it just feels like there's more of an emphasis put on, like, you know, you can still have great characterization, but the producers want a supermodel in the movie, basically. And I hope that doesn't come across as me saying anything negative about, you know, the looks of the actresses in these older movies. That's not what I mean at all, but like, but there's a more natural look to these actresses.
Yeah. I'm
Versus
assuming though again
what
that
we get nowadays.
yeah, I'm just assuming that John Boorman wanted that contrast between Morgana, you know, she's very hot and sultry and like almost like a reptile, like a snake, and she's blonde and voluptuous. So I feel like he wanted to have that nice contrast, whereas you have this, you know, sweet, pretty, you know, almost girl next door, kind of like more class, maybe a slightly classic beauty, not an exotic beauty. Like she's not like a Charlize Theron, who's very, like you say, like a supermodel, was a model, very exotic looking. So I suspect that's what it is. And like for instance, in
I'm just saying it's a, you know, it's a far cry that, and I'm not complaining about this too much because it was very formative for both Jared and me, but this is not half naked Keira Knightley strutting around.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it was funny because there's one movie that I reviewed ages ago called Blade Runner, and there is an actress that was in that, and I have never had as many comments. It was Jenny Agutter is the actress. She's a British actress that was in that. And I have never had as many comments about an actress than I have about her. I've had hundreds of people saying, oh my God, I had such a crush on Jenny Agutter because she's like half naked in the movie. And then she's also in the movie An American Werewolf in London, and there's a nude scene with her in that. And so just like the guys of that generation just completely lost their minds over her. So she was a great beauty, but also just very sexy. So I think in this case, I wouldn't say Guinevere's sexy. I think she's just, you know, pretty, like I say, maybe slightly girl next door.
You made your good point though, because like I'm saying that about, you know, the actresses, you know, of the era, but then on the flip side, in this same movie, you've got Helen Mirren, who is sultry and super sexy
exactly,
and all that stuff. So the movie's not completely devoid of that.
No. And I think that's what I think they were going for that. I think they're kind of going for that. Even in Game of Thrones, like, you know, you've got like I think Lena Headey is, you know, just a classic beauty. Like, you know, they talk about her cheekbones and she's very queenly. But then I don't know who would be the sexy person in that show, to be honest with you.
I don't know. You might find some disagreement from Jared.
Oh, okay. Do you think she's sexy?
Yeah, Lena Headey. Yeah.
Okay, maybe that's a bad example then.
I won't speak for you, Jared.
Maybe Sansa. Maybe Sansa's the classic beauty. Then I don't know. Maybe that'd be better. And Lady Headey would be the hot one.
Game of Thrones is rife with beautiful actors.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I could provide an absolute long list of those.
Yeah.
But I would just say to sort of steer back to Cherie Lunghi's here. I do think that, like, you know, even though like by modern sensibilities, yes, we would have wanted a little bit more from Guinevere, I do think we get to see a little bit of like her natural spark and produce when her honor is questioned, you know, like she does speak up for herself and basically like, no, I am innocent of these charges, because of course at that time she has her feelings for Lancelot, but she has not,
which is not against it's not illegal.
Yeah. And thoughts are not sins, even though in certain Christian contexts, like probably they would consider them so. But in this case,
depending on even in modern context, honestly.
Yes, but I do think that like for the time that was their way of showing like Guinevere's kind of strength, because yes, we went through a phase in modern cinema, and I think fortunately people are starting to recognize you can be more complex, where it's like, oh, we want to show that our female character is not a passive. So of course, what we have to do is we have to lean into the more masculine ideas. Well, she's a warrior, she's a fighter, she's going to be out there with the boys kicking ass.
Yeah.
And
although
like,
I think when they're storming the castle, if I recall, she is defending the castle. She not?
She gets a few licks in, and so I think, like I said, I think that the move, like, yes, this is not, Guinevere in King Arthur, which again, as Gwen says, very formative for both of us, where she is, she is a warrior woman, wielding a bow and arrow on the battlefield. Like that would have been a bridge too far for this classic rendition of King Arthur, but I think that they do give us a little bit of kind of her inner spark and why she is ultimately like a good queen for this realm. And yes, I 100% agree with Heidi about that they chose her qualities very deliberately to contrast her with essentially the almost otherworldly seductive power of a character like Morgana.
Who is using her what do you call it, her magic. She's I believe personally that she's enhancing herself, because at the end she kind of like withers and kind of like, it kind of reminded me a little bit of sorry, you have to help me, from Game of Thrones. Melisandre. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. She's using glamour to kind of keep herself looking youthful and beautiful and everything like that. So that is her. And that's why I was saying, I do think she charms like Gawain to a certain extent. I mean, sure, he's going willingly, but we know what she kind of looks like at the end, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think she's probably not using it as, because age-wise, like she, at that stage in the movie.
Well, she is Arthur's sister, so she is, yeah.
So
but
she
sometimes
might be,
magic takes its toll, though, right? Like it takes its toll on you, and so yeah, she's not like Melisandre, where she's like 400 years old, but I think it does take its toll on you, kind of like Dorian Gray, like he's gone into this agreement, and then as the painting kind of like starts to wither away to keep him attractive, kind of thing.
And since we're talking about her, great perfect segue into talking about Helen Mirren as Morgana, who is like another like person like next to Nicol Williamson, who I think they're both just having the time of their lives in this movie. Again, maybe not with each other, but I think she's just having so much fun playing, and she did make a comment on like one of the documentaries, which is that Morgana kind of represents men's fear of women, and I thought that was interesting comment, even though like Morgana is very much like portrayed in this as an sort of an evil character, but also she's been brought to that point kind of because of what she experienced as a child, her father being murdered, and Merlin using his magic to have Uther trick her mother and and assault her, and so like it's not without reason. Like you can very clearly see how she's ended up like that, but then it's she definitely chooses to go down a really dark path, and but it's just, but it is a lot of fun watching her like dig into playing that sort of deliciously evil type of character, and it's just a thrill to see Helen freaking Mirren playing this, and I really love the back and forth between her and Merlin. I just think it's so great, and if anything, like I would just like I think the biggest problem with this movie is that it's too short, because there's so much more to be mined from these characters and the storylines. You know, we get the sense that like she's been training with Merlin, and he's even been intrigued by her before he begins to get a sense of that maybe he shouldn't be passing things on to her. But I like the fact that we get the sense that that's their relationship, that he's actually like kind of eager to take her up on her offer of like, you know, sort of helping ease his loneliness and be like a student.
Mm-hmm.
And until he realizes that he shouldn't be doing that. He says, "I've shown you far too much already." And then, like, you know, he attempts to trap her, you know, beneath the earth when she turns the tables on him. And so I think their relationship is really interesting. And I don't know. I just love the way she sinks her teeth into, you know, there's, maybe it's not the most, from a modern context, like maybe sometimes you want a bit more depth, but sometimes it is also fun just to watch an actress really have fun playing the evil temptress. You know, it can be a lot of fun to watch, but even so, I think she brings great dimension to the character. And
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what I was saying earlier about apparently her and Nicol having this conflict from before, you know, maybe that kind of like, you know, lent to their relationship in the movie. It might have been helpful in a way. By the way, I just want to shout out the costumes in this are so crazy. She's wearing like this cloak and it's all covered in fringe, like rows and rows and rows and fringe. Like I can't even imagine how heavy that would be. And there's this one scene at the wedding where she's kind of like playing around with the robe. She's sort of like, you know, using it almost like bat wings or something. Just
I saw it, like,
her physicality in this is so good.
I saw somebody from Arrow Video did like a featurette on the movie to coincide with the 4K release, and she loved that she kind of like her costume kind of looks like she's dressed up as a tree.
I don't know. Well, she's wearing a gown underneath it. This is supposed to be kind of like a wrap, like, you know, like she's, and then she uses it all. Like, so right now she's kind of got it. So she's got it wrapped around her arms and she's pulling it into herself. But at other times she sort of flings it about. Like it's like, well, Merlin's cloak, for instance, it's actually made up of like little patches. Like it's thousands of patches that have all been sort of like laid on top. Like it's, the costumes in this are bonkers.
I've always been intrigued by that because Merlin's costume on screen reads as black.
It's not. It's actually multicolored. I saw it at auction. Yeah. And so that might have just been the lighting or, you know, again, the cinematography or whatever. He does have another one, though, that he wears underneath the cloak. Like the stand-up collar is the cloak with the patches, but he wears another one under. It's almost like rags. Like it's sort of like it's got long, you know, sleeves.
I thought that was so cool because it's, even though in this instance it would be, you know, it would be white instead of black, but it very much reminds me of Saruman of Many Colors in The Lord of the Rings, where at first glance it appears that to Gandalf that he is wearing his signature white robe, but then as he sort of reveals himself, you realize that it's actually many different colors.
It is,
and so this is kind of the same effect, but with black instead of white.
But she, like, there's one scene I think where she's got that silver breastplate that she wears. It's like shaped and it's like shocking. You got even a belly button in it and boobs. It's like boob armor. She's like, she's kind of like writhing around. She's just like doing like, she's like it's like boob armor. Which George Martin says women shouldn't, like, what is it? Nipples on a breastplate or useless or something. He has
no, that's I love. Can I just say I love boob armor commentary across the Game of Thrones fandom, because dear God, people really get upset about that.
They do. That actually, I have to say, I don't know that there are nipples there, but it's the idea. I believe they cast it on her, so it is her shape. You know what I mean? So when they they do plaster. They do like they usually do like saran wrap, and then they do plaster, and then they do the casting, and then I guess they make a reverse casting, and then they cast it out of metal. And actually, John Boorman apparently had that breastplate in his collection for like until he died, and then I think in his will it was supposed to go back to Helen Mirren. It was like he wanted it to go back to her. So because it's her, it's basically a cast of her.
I actually think he's no, he's still alive.
Oh, so I thought he died.
No, she is still waiting on that.
Is she really? I thought he died. You know what? Well, because people were
he's 93 years old. I only know that because he actually did an interview for the 4K release, and he's talking very slowly, and he is quite old, but no, at 93 years old.
Okay, so she still hasn't gotten it then yet. She hasn't gotten it yet. There have been some, I think, that have gone to auction. There were duplicates, but there was one mask. I don't know if you guys watch Adam Savage, but he did a whole thing on King Arthur's armor and all this. It was really, really fun. But there was one mask that went missing, and they could not find it, so they had to make a reproduction of it. That one there, Mordred mask. Anyway, it turned out it was all along. It was in John Boorman's house. He had just lost it. So he's got nipples on his armor. Yeah, but it kind of works in this case because he's a very like creepy, weird character, right? Like there's a scene where Morgana is like rubbing oil on him.
Yeah, that's
naked body.
That's all kinds of disturbing.
Well, she starts off when he's young. She's doing when he's young, and then they do the transition, and then he's.
I just want to point out, like, I think that, like, in a film full of iconic stuff, I really do feel like Mordred's armor is like one of the most iconic things, and it's so freaking creepy, and it's been the inspiration for a lot of things. To take it back to Game of Thrones, I'm thinking of like the what were they called in Marine? The
Sons of the Harpy.
The Sons of the Harpy.
The Sons of the Harpy, yes.
Yeah. And I just think it's really effective because Mordred isn't that much of a character. Really, he becomes more of an obstacle, to be faced in the latter portion of the film. But I think that the costume design just lends so much weight to the character, and like again makes him sort of like instantly iconic, and it's such a weird kind of look. It's like something pulled out of like Greek mythology, plopped into this, which again is like what's
I think
so
he's
great
even
about
got.
this.
It looks like he's got snakes in his hair. Like I can't remember. So I think someone told me what it was based upon. I think someone had messaged me that this is what that they used. Bob Bringwood, who's the costume designer, what the inspiration was. But yeah, it does have sort of like a Greek, like mythological sort of feeling to it.
Yeah, it's what's kind of so great about this movie, going back to like the fact that it's more rooted in fantasy than history, is that John Boorman didn't pay attention that much to like being like any kind of historical accuracy with like the costumes and stuff like that. It was just
it's completely anachronistic.
Look good, and and I would be interested in like given your sort of expertise in all things costumes, like how you feel. Because I love it. I'm someone who does.
I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. I loved it. Now, it was funny, though, because John, he was saying in an interview that he wanted to, like, it should have been, like, early Middle Ages or early, like, it would have been, like, I think it's supposed to be probably, like, the 11th century. I'm not exactly sure what timeline it's supposed to be taken. He says he pushed it to 12th century, but the armor is actually closer to 16th century. So he's, like, well out of the ballpark. But what makes it I didn't personally have a problem with that, but what makes it extremely anachronistic is that there's sequins in the movie. So the Lady of the Lake, there's a scene where she, you know, puts her, well, actually I should think they show her in the lake lying down, and they show her putting her arm out. So she's got sequins on her costume. And then during the trial, like Guinevere, where she's being defended by Arthur, she's wearing like a cowl, but that's all covered in sequins. It's basically, so this is very 1980s. I actually love this costume though. So it's supposed to kind of look a little bit like mail, I think, like chainmail. That's what I think they're kind of going for, like a gold chainmail, but it's actually sequins. So, and there's a couple of other costumes she has as well that so it's very anachronistic, but I personally don't mind it. I was the same with, I've been the same way with some other movies that are not historically accurate. People get really bent out of shape about it, but I kind of like it because they've kind of defined the look of this particular world. It is a fantasy world. And this is sometimes where you guys know I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan, and I love the costumes in Game of Thrones. When I do a little bit of pushback on it, it's usually when they defy their own rules. So they established the rules, they created the rules, and then they come up with what they come up with. But then when they break their own rules, I'm like, well, you define people will say, well, Heidi, there's dragons. Yes, there's dragons, but there are also human people living on a planet with gravity, and they are breathing oxygen, and they are, cooking and eating and doing whatever they're doing that's very human. So they have to follow some of the rules. So what my attitude about this is, they've created particular rules within this fantasy world, and they have followed through with them. So that's why I'm kind of like, I'm into it. So when I'm not into it is when someone creates a world and then they kind of don't follow through with their own setup. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's where I come from.
I just want to shout out, you mentioned about the Lady of the Lake. And
oh, yes. So you can see her sequins. Or actually, I think they might even be jewels. Those are sequins. Yeah.
Yeah, this is honestly one of my favorite shots in not only this film, but in cinema, period. I just love
absolutely
the sword coming out of the lake. And I just think it's so breathtakingly gorgeous. And yeah. It's amazing.
And I don't even know how they did it. Like, I don't know how they did it. I'm assuming maybe they did it in a pool, but it looks practical. So I'm not sure. Maybe they found a calm pool.
I'm a little less enamored with the shot of the actual Lady of the Lake, like laying in the water, like later in the movie. But when it's just like her arm, like coming out of the water, I think it's breathtaking.
And they used that in the trailer, and that was definitely a huge, draw, I think, for a lot of people. And so it's Hilary Joyal played the Lady in the Lake. She was uncredited, it said.
And especially with the fact that it's accompanied by, again, Siegfried's Funeral March by Wagner. It's just so iconic. And actually, sidebar for a second, like another reason why I think I so responded to the use of Wagner in this movie at the time, which now makes me think that I saw it after Lord of the Rings was already in theaters. I have no idea, honestly. But because there were comparisons drawn between Howard Shore's score for Lord of the Rings and Wagner's Ring Cycle, that I felt kind of like there was a kinship between the two, and it's sort of why I absolutely love that when Return of the King came out, the final music in the end credits for that film has the music kind of trailing off very much in the same style as how Wagner's final opera in the Ring Cycle ends. It was very similar, and I was like, oh, that's a really nice homage. So yeah, I was digging it for that kind of connection, and No, you know what? I can tell you exactly when I saw this movie now, because I just remembered that it was after I saw Fellowship of the Ring,
Oh.
because I remember that year I did, I was in the habit of like putting together compilation mixed CDs of like my favorite film scores and music throughout the year. And the little thing I did off to the side was make a sort of soundtrack for the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, using music from like other things, because at that point there was just the score for the first film, and I heavily used Siegfried's Funeral March as like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
plugging in for certain things in that, you know, makeshift Lord of the Rings trilogy soundtrack. I also remember I used Carter Burwell's score for the movie Rob Roy, as a matter of fact,
Oh.
'cause that was a very sort of hobbity
Mm-hmm.
sounding main theme. So, oh,
Also
wow.
Liam Neeson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is that's an underrated movie. It came out the
Mm-hmm.
same year as Braveheart and did not have the scale of Braveheart, but I think was just as well made and acted. So another Brian Cox was in that as well. He was in both of those
Oh,
films.
wow.
Yeah,
I have to rewatch that.
yeah.
Uh,
Um,
um,
Yeah.
but okay, so that was me getting sidetracked.
Yeah.
Um, but going back, you know, we were talking about Helen Mirren, and then we just went off in a whole different direction. But it's, yeah, Jared, did you give your thoughts about Helen Mirren,
Uh,
or did
no, not yet, but I can do so now.
yeah? Go ahead.
She's great. She might be my favorite part of this movie, honestly. She's because she gets to play a very fun and multi-layered character. A character who is in, again, that idea of like all the best villains are the heroes of their own story. She definitely has essentially a reason to act the way she does, and grounded in her childhood trauma of losing her father under this kind of nefarious subterfuge that Merlin and Uther essentially carry out on her mother, like the little heartbreaking moment where she realizes her father is dead, and then Uther, in disguise as her father, shows up, and her mother doesn't recognize him, but she's just looking at him like, there is something wrong with this. Like, and of course she is 100% correct. But so when she shows up later in the movie, like knowing that she is playing Morgan Le Fay, like we know that like Morgan is bad news in the King Arthur mythos. Like she is here to wreck house. But the way she plays these early scenes, where you can get the sense that she's actually a member of her brother's court, and he tolerates her presence there, and Merlin is familiar with her, and she comes across as very like earnest, because she is trying essentially to in many respects recognize that she has this talent, and she wants to use it and learn about it. And like you can almost be forgiven for like being lulled into a false sense of security. It's like, this is just a woman in the world, like trying essentially to break outside the boundaries that have been set for her. And but it makes it all the more appealing knowing that she is actually also playing this kind of like coiled snake lying in wait for her moment to strike. And when she's talking to Merlin and being very earnest and like, talking about like, feelings of love and respect, and like, but knowing all the time, like, you killed my mother, you bastard, I'm going to make you pay for this. Or you killed my father, I should say. And violated.
Prepare to die.
Yes. You had to say. You had to say it, but essentially, that. Even though, so there's definitely a reading where you could be like, actually, Morgana's in the right here, and she has a lot of, but ultimately what makes villains are their actions. And I think the moment that Morgana really, crosses the line into true villainy is the classic moment where she essentially perpetuates the cycle, where like she takes her trauma that she has used to essentially rise up and fuel her and ultimately, you know, trick Merlin and gain his power. And then what does she do? She essentially uses that power to perpetuate exactly the same sin that was inflicted on her and her family when she was younger. And she uses it to essentially violate and assault Arthur and get pregnant by him. Her brother. Her brother,
how did this go over with the family, Jared?
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
At this point, my mom was kind of like borderline asleep, but I did let her know, like, you know, that this was probably something that was coming in the later scenes. So she was more prepared for this than the Uther thing. Also, like, you know, this was back in the days before Game of Thrones made like, more like mainstream in terms of what people like would accept to seeing in their film and television. But yes, this is meant to be a highly unnatural act, and Morgana definitely plays it as the like, aha, got you, brother kind of moment, when she announces that she has conceived basically a child with him, and that child basically is going to be the doom of the land because of his unnatural upbringing. And that's why, like, you know, we're mentioning the Mordred's armor, particularly when he's a kid. Like the kid who's playing, you know, and it's all the more funny that it's the director's son, Charlie Boorman. The kid who's playing Mordred definitely gives off, you know, Omen, demon child type of vibes, particularly when he's leading Percival through like the woods with his like creepy, unnatural laugh. And like this is a case where like our modern like audience themes are thinking like, don't follow this kid. He's bad news.
And there's bodies hanging from the trees.
Yeah. And yeah, definitely, like I mentioned, I think his armor kind of reminded me almost of like a Medusa like quality in that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like did they find that they kind of look like snakes in his hair? Yeah,
and they do. And then when he leads Percival to Morgana, and at this point, Morgana, you know, like her costuming, dress for the job you want. She's basically like, I am queen now, and I'm gonna wear the super sultry, you know, outfits that I could never get away with at court, and the fact that she is at this point managed to, you know, not only foil the Grail quest up to this point, but has a number of Arthur's knights under her sway. Like she is feeling herself, and that is a moment where like Helen Mirren just gets to play like kind of the sultry confidence that makes her so appealing, because like she is not a woman of the times. Like she's basically like, I'm queen, bitch. I rule Camelot now. And this, of course, her pride ends up being her undoing, because right at the moment when she thinks she has everything, you know, under control, that is when the forces of goodness turn the tables on her, and she meets a very fitting end. But it is a lot of fun to see her essentially serving her delicious villainy in these scenes.
Before we tackle Percival, which I think will kind of lead us into the final act of this movie, I want to run through and talk about, like, you know, I want to jump actually back to the beginning for a bit, because I want to talk a bit about Gabriel Byrne, who, like, I think the first time I saw and was really impressed by Gabriel Byrne was his turn as D'Artagnan in The Man in the Iron Mask, which you know, has always like been a favorite of mine. And like, it's so funny because I saw him in that and I was like, that is like the personification of a quintessentially, you know, like good man. And he's not that. This movie, he's awful. Uther is.
I mean, obviously, I saw this movie when it originally came out, but I can't remember when I was like, "Oh, that's Gabriel Byrne." I can't think of, like, I mean, Usual Suspects obviously is probably one of his most iconic roles, but he doesn't really look like, kind of like Kieran. He doesn't really. I would, if I didn't know it was him, I might not know it's him, like in this role.
Oh, I think Yeah, I think I would. I think I actually I don't remember if I knew he was in this before I saw it, but I do remember like as soon as he strolled up and like took off his lifted up his helmet, I was like, oh my God, Gabriel Byrne. But yeah, but also like I am trying to think of The Man in the Iron Mask came out in like 98. So that wasn't that like, yeah, it's not 17 years, but it wasn't that far removed. So he didn't look too different, but yeah, it's interesting because Uther's always been an interesting character to me because like especially in the Merlin miniseries, he actually starts off as someone with kind of good intentions, but perhaps with some tendencies that are kind of red flags that Merlin should pick up on. But then he loses his way and becomes very selfish. And in this movie, there's not enough time to give him that much complexity. So he's the movie starts off and it's like, yeah, he's an ass. But it's really interesting that Merlin, though, has kind of pinned his hopes on him, early in the film of working really hard to orchestrate this, piece. And then Uther just completely smashes it to hell within minutes, because of his lust for Igraine. But so like not the most like character-wise, he's not sort of the most complex, just because of the amount of time that it has. But I like what Gabriel Byrne does with it. He's not playing someone who's likable at all, but he's not supposed to be. But again, he's like, comes from the British stage, and so he's lends a lot of like authority to the role as you would expect. And I think about moments that like make your skin crawl with just like, obviously, the actual, when he takes advantage of Igraine, but also like, I think really creepy is like then when it cuts to 9 months later and the baby is born and she's like still confused about what actually happened, and she's like, a man came to me, I thought it was my husband, and he's grinning, he's so satisfied with himself. And I just like it again makes your skin crawl. And so I think Gabriel Byrne does a really good job of like making Uther kind of a detestable character, and we need that because we need the contrast between Uther and Arthur. And so yeah, not necessarily like a fan favorite character in this movie, but I think he does exactly what's needed with the character of Uther, and I remain a huge fan of Gabriel Byrne as an actor. I think I love whenever he pops up in things. I kind of would have loved to see a story of him playing Uther where there's more time to spend with the character and really get into the sort of in-depth, story of Uther and Merlin, because I think Gabriel Byrne would have absolutely killed that. And but as it is, I think he does what's needed for the role in the film and does it very well.
Yeah, I would agree. Like none of my comments about the like how rough the opening scenes were, both for my mother and for me watching this, have to do with Gabriel Byrne's performance. He is playing the character as written. It just so happens that the character he is playing is a complete and utter bastard. And in particular, I take your point, Gwen, about the fact like it would be interesting to see a little bit more of what led Uther to this point, because by the time we meet him in this movie, he is essentially already fallen to the dark side. He is like whatever Merlin told him about, like, you need to become king and unite Britain. He is basically bought into that and is now firmly drinking his own Kool-Aid of not only am I king, but it's like that means I get to do whatever the hell I want and take whatever the hell I want. And if anyone dares to say no, I will just call on my magical wizard friend to make it so. And
by the way, this is the shot where he's standing on a ladder instead of a horse.
Yes. It's so funny, the close-ups.
Yeah, which again, they without CGI, they had to do what they had to do. But in particular, his arrogance, obviously, as you said, Gwen, represents a cautionary tale for Arthur, even though Arthur never, really meets his father except, as a baby. But in particular, the fact that I did enjoy in terms of dark humor, even though what happens next is horrifying. The moment when after Merlin has finally managed to talk Uther into doing something where the negotiation was basically Duke of Cornwall is giving you something. You gotta give a little something back. That's how negotiations work. And Uther does it begrudgingly, and everyone's like, huzzah, the alliance is formed. And then when they go to the dinner, and the Duke of Cornwall brings his wife out for the dance, and everyone's like, uh-oh, this is a bad idea. And then Uther, again, this is a moment where the acting is perhaps a little bit stilted in design, but the moment when her dance finishes, Uther's just like, I must have her. And they're like, but sir, the alliance. And he's like, I must have her. And you're just, and you can literally almost see everyone in the audience doing the facepalm moment, because they're just this was predictable, guys. And
I love the shifty looks that his men are giving him. That they probably know that Uther's tendencies, and oh shit, this is bad.
So, by the way, the food on the table, doesn't it look kind of disgusting?
Yeah, it looks like what you would expect, medieval British food to look like.
It looks like there's octopus or something.
This movie was not written by George R.R. Martin, so we don't get 3 pages worth of descriptions of decadent, fantastical cuisine.
I know the food in Game of Thrones is so good. No, it looks just kind of disgusting.
I gotta say, obviously Uther is completely to blame for all the terrible, awful things he does, but also I'm gonna shit on the Duke of Cornwall too, because you basically made a dick move to basically show off how hot your wife is.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. Usually, she was the entertainment, and normally you wouldn't have your wife be the entertainment, because she's basically doing a dance of the 7 veils, a whirling dervish. I was sort of comparing it to a whirling dervish type dance.
He's he obviously wanted to basically shove it in Uther's face, that he's got this gorgeous queen, but then is upset that it provokes too much of a response. So yeah.
By the way, can I mention the actor who plays him is Corin Redgrave. He's actually Vanessa Redgrave's brother. Did you guys know that?
Oh wow.
Yeah, Vanessa and what's the other sister's name? He was the middle child.
Yeah, he does not give the most subtle of performances.
No. Again, he was a theater actor.
Yeah.
Thespian acting genius.
Which that's not fair, because nobody's given the most subtle of performances.
No, I mean John might have asked. Well, actually, no, I don't think he did, because one of the notes I saw, the actor who plays Percival, he went up to John a couple of days in, Paul Jeffrey. He went up to John and he said, John, how are you feeling about my performance? Is it okay? Do I need to make any changes? And he said, yeah, no, just keep doing what you're doing. That's why I hired you. So it doesn't sound like John Boorman was the type, he wasn't really an actor's director from what I understood. And he could be a little bit mean as well.
Oh yes.
If he didn't get what he wanted,
not an actor's director. We're familiar with that school of directing, aren't we, Jared?
Well, like
With
George
certain
Lucas
franchises.
example,
Yeah,
not an actor director.
But George Lucas was not a dick to his actors. You know?
No,
He
I don't think
really
so.
know how to-
Yeah, it's just he's more into the technical. That's more his thing, the setup. I think actually Ridley Scott's kind of like that too. I think Ridley Scott is like just really a nerd into the, so John was really into the action scenes, into the lighting, into the cinematography, maybe the writing. I don't know that he was as interested in the.
Yeah, I think his perspective on it was like he hired
Mhm.
the actors, based on their strength as actors, and like, and he
Yes.
was going to leave them to do what they do best, and
Mhm.
he was not going, and he was then going to focus on the things that were sort of under his purview, and
True.
and so
Yeah, like I'd read that, or in the behind the scenes, for instance, Liam Neeson was in of Mice and Men, a production of Mice and Men at the time, and apparently John went to see it, and so he was like, yes, like he can kind of imagine, that person being in that role, and so I think that's sort of maybe where he was going with that, but yeah, maybe because again, like, I mean, my background is in theater. I went to theater school. When you're on stage, you have to project. you have to be bigger, a little bit bigger than you would be on film. And like Gabriel Byrne was saying, we didn't really understand how it worked. Like, why am I on a ladder? Like, why is this happening? Like, why aren't I on the horse? So they're like, oh, it's okay. We're just doing the close up. I'm like, oh, okay. So, but they did say that John was very patient with them. Like he would, I think Liam Neeson was saying like that he knew that they didn't know how the film world works. So he took his time educating them on it. And so for all these people who are, it's interesting because I was thinking, did you guys watch The Gilded Age? Because the majority of the cast in that are from Broadway.
Yeah, I have not, although I love Downton Abbey, so it's been on my list.
Yeah. So it's like, so they're working with a very large cast of characters who are actually Broadway performers, and it's very different, because you're just tiny on a stage, and you've got this massive auditorium of people, and you have to act kind of bigger, and like I said, you have to, especially in the old days. They didn't really have the miking like they do now. Like if you were in a theater, oftentimes there'd be no miking. You're just working with the acoustics of the theater. So you're having to project. And that's why I think when we might have had there's less subtlety perhaps in some of the performances, but I don't want to take away from it.
Yeah, I think that it's, though, I mean, it as I've said, it kind of depends on, what you sort of want out of the film, but I think it works in its favor to have this very theatrical style of acting because the film is very theatrical. Okay, just to run through some people, I don't want to take too long because I want to focus on the ending of the film, but just gonna run through while we're talking about and Gabriel Byrne. Also want to just mentioned Cherie Boorman as Igraine, obviously John Boorman's daughter. I actually think she has a couple of good moments. Some of them are a bit, as you might expect when the director brings on, and their children onto the production. But I actually think she has some good moments, particularly when Cornwall's body is brought before her, and especially she's trying to comfort Morgana, and so I actually think she did quite a good job in scenes like that.
I would agree, and that again, that's one of the things that if this were a more modern audience, this movie was being made today, I think they probably would have done a little bit more with the character of Igraine and how she felt basically about being violated. And it's one of those things where that's not the story the movie is telling, and it's just something you gotta roll with. If you can't, you can't. That's completely understandable.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's so many, and then they kind of leave her behind too. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say they kind of leave her behind. Like she's been violated, forced to give birth to the baby, and then have the baby taken from her. Like, it's just all, and then
then yeah, unfortunately then it's like, okay, well, story-wise she served her purpose, so we don't need to revisit. So like obviously if anybody hasn't read, even though I realize that the author is controversial for reasons I won't get into, even though she's not alive anymore. The Mists of Avalon is a very, good book for delving into the feminine side of the King Arthur legend. So if you don't have, you can get past misgivings about the author, I'd still recommend reading it, because it gives due to characters like Guinevere, Igraine, Morgana. And it's a different take on the story, where Morgana actually gets to not be the villainess. So yeah.
I heard though that there was a longer version of the movie, and like in typical fashion, the studio were saying, no, it's got to be trimmed down. It was well over 3 hours, I think. Gwen, is that what?
You can even see some shots from a scene where Lancelot is rescuing Guinevere from some brigands in the original trailer for the film. That is unfortunately, that the footage must have been lost, because even on the new 4K edition, they didn't put any deleted scenes or anything on there. It's a shame, because I would absolutely love to see a more expansive version of the film. But yeah. Okay, so just running through a couple other names real quick. Obviously, so we've alluded to them throughout, but we got both Patrick Stewart as Leon deGrance and Liam Neeson as Gawain. I think it was just really fun to see both those actors in these early roles, even if Leon deGrance is another character who kind of gets left behind at a certain point.
Totally, yeah. Where does he end up?
As Guinevere's father, and
totally.
Once he's not sort of needed, it's like, okay, we don't need him anymore. And
he's at the wedding though, and then that's it. Is that?
Yeah.
He is one of the early champions for Arthur, though. That actually is
true. That's why he's important.
Yeah, the moment where he's basically if a boy drew the sword, then the boy shall be king. And when the other actors are basically are you with us or against us? He's against you. And then he's paying for it. And of course, that's Arthur's big moment of he goes to rescue Leon deGrance. And that is what gives him the credibility when he's able to, ultimately get Urians on his side and stuff. So, but yes, Patrick Stewart unfortunately does disappear, partway through this movie. He had to
I just love the fact that I know he's younger, but he looks the same. He does.
By the way, I was rewatching this scene where he's trying to pull the sword out of the stone, and it's I said to Jack, it's like he was going to the bathroom or something, the grunting that he was doing.
I love the really dramatic, fall away that he does.
Whereas Arthur just kind of goes up to it and oh, I need a sword. And he just
Jared, I just meant that after the wedding he disappears. He's obviously very important early on in the film, but it's you might not even notice that he disappears if not for the fact that it's Patrick freaking Stewart.
Yes. You're because even in Dune he disappears, but then at least he comes back toward the end. So you're oh, there he is. His hair's longer.
And then we have Liam Neeson, who looks really young in this, so, and again, as we said, rocking the man bun.
He is. He's rocking. He made that fashionable.
And I just like the fact that again, this is all going along with the theatrical acting. He's giving a really big performance, and so it's not going to go down as my favorite Liam Neeson performance, but it's just such a joy to see him in the film, and
although if you've seen Have you guys seen what's that movie he just did, like Naked Gun? If you've seen that performance might match it.
He is hilarious in that movie.
He's really funny in it. Yeah. He's got a set of particular skills. No, it's really fun. I took my kids to see it in the theater. We actually really enjoyed it.
It's interesting though, because like Gawain is actually in a lot more of this movie than I thought he was originally. He's in the film as early as like the sort of dance party following the fight at Leander Drentz's castle, and then you see him dead on the horse during the Grail quest. So like he's a nice good stretch of this movie, and he gets to play a big part in sort of a central story, which is the accusation against Guinevere, and so no, it's a trip. Just like all these actors, I just love the fact that we get to see a early Liam Neeson in this. And it was funny because in that big scene around like the round table and like they're all having their drinks and talking amongst themselves, I was looking at all like the extras and stuff in that scene, and I was like, that must be a pretty cool thing to like, even if you weren't like a major actor, and if you can like point to this movie and say like, I was background extra over there.
I had to wear a suit of armor that was made by like Terry English.
And there's a shot of like, I guess it's like Arthur's, like, I don't know if it would be his like a squire or attendant. It's this little kid who just looks like really grumpy. He's like, like
his cupbearer,
like pouring a drink or something.
Yeah.
And I just thought that kid's having a bad day.
Maybe he was. I was going to say, by the way, so years ago when I first graduated from theater school, I did a summer stock theater show, and it was like a Shakespeare, and I was working with this actor, and he was British. And anyway, it turned out he was staying in the same accommodations I was. So he came back, and I was there with my husband, and I was pregnant at the time with my youngest. And so we started chatting, and he told me that he worked as an extra on Star Wars. And I was like, what? Tell me everything. Tell me everything. It was one of those types of things, So I think that anybody who was in that round table, that would have been like absolutely amazing. And I'm sure I'm sure they have lots of, by the way, sometimes I haven't had this with this show, but I was mentioning earlier that I did a review of Logan's Run, and I had so many people tell me that they had been background on that movie. It was shot in Texas, and they were telling me how awful the costumes were to wear, and just all the all their experiences. I haven't had this happen with Excalibur. That video didn't do as well as my Logan's Run one, but I always love it when people share their stories, because there's so many cool stories out there, right?
Yeah.
But but going back to Liam Neeson for a second, I think probably like, again, going back to him and Helen Mirren, I think like for him, like that's because they lived together for a while and they were in a relationship. So like, he must must be fond memories looking back on this movie and thinking about that. And it's fun because again, like they were on when he gave that anecdote, that story about like she was on that episode of Graham Norton too. So they were like sitting next to each other. So it's sort of nice that they they really get on very well, all these years later.
I love that.
Obviously they're not together, but
and his wife, and actually, it's weird because I was just talking about how that one actor was Vanessa Redgrave's sister.
Lynn Redgrave.
Yeah. But Vanessa Redgrave was actually Liam Neeson's mother-in-law, because he was married to Miranda Richardson,
Natasha
who then died. Natasha Richardson, sorry. So technically Colin would have been his uncle.
Oh, wow. all these family trees are every bit as convoluted as you would expect from a traditional medieval story, including something like Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Everyone. The great scene with like Diana Rigg, where she's trying to parse out how Cersei and Loras and Sansa and everybody and Tyrion are all related now with their big
Yes, that's right. There's that whole thing, twice removed, and well, of course, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, even especially when you're watching a show like A Night of the Seven Kingdoms or House of the Dragon, like you kind of see all the ancestry. And George always talks about how you would have squired for another family, or you might have gotten a summered there, or So there would be quite a bit of inbreeding, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna put this next group of actors just together because again, I don't want to spend too long on them, but I do want to sort of give them their due. You've got Keith Buckley as Urians, who I think he's really interesting because he really has two big sections in the movie, and the rest he's just kind of there. But I love the fact that he goes from the one who's doubting Arthur and is against him in the beginning to then recognizing his the as he says, the courage in his veins, and he swears loyalty to him. And then by the end of the film, he's one that refuses to renounce Arthur as he's being chased by Mordred.
Oh God, yeah.
And then he passes on, says to Percival, you're the last of us, you must try again. And it's just nice that even though he doesn't get much to do outside of those sections of the movie, but I thought they did a really good job of imbuing him with a character arc, even though he doesn't get that much time. And then the other two actors I wanted to make sure to single out are Clive Swift as Sir Ector.
I love Sir Ector.
Earlier in the movie, as well as Niall O'Brien as Kay. Who is a far cry from the Sir Kay in the Disney movie. He is much more on Arthur's side and is really his right hand. And I thought that that was a great performance. So I just wanted to make sure I singled out those actors because I thought they did a good job with more limited material, but especially I love Kay more every time I watch this movie because he's just because again, looking back on the Disney movie, he pretty much hates Arthur, and he's very mean to him, and in this version of the story, though, he's very loving towards Arthur pretty much throughout the entire story. And even though he has that slight moment of temptation to claim that he pulled, Excalibur out of the stone, it only takes about a millisecond before he owns up to it's no, Arthur did it. And I thought he did a really good job. Any you guys got any comments on those actors?
No, I thought that they did a good job with the roles as they were given. As you said, we don't get a ton with Sir Ector or with Urien, but the Urien's moment where he refuses to renounce Arthur, I thought was a very powerful one, and yes, I appreciated seeing a version of Kay that was less of a jerk. Although again, I almost, even though I know Kay's role as Arthur's seneschal, I almost forgot that was him in the later scene when Arthur is in Arthur's court, just because again that's another actor who was playing a much younger version of it, and then got to play his actual age. But yeah, it was ultimately, I think that this cast is pretty stacked, and when there are actors who are just playing like smaller roles. Like sometimes there can be a temptation to get frustrated, particularly when they're like legendary figures in their own right, who have like lots of stories told about them. In this movie, they have to serve the larger story, so we don't get as much of them, but they all do a good job with what they're given.
I in particular just want to, speak about this scene real quick where Urians knights Arthur. I just think it's so great because there is a little, there is a touch of a magical quality about this moment where I think Urians feels the power of Excalibur in that moment, and it's played kind of similarly in the Merlin miniseries where. In that version of the story, it's Lot who actually is, in this position. And in both cases, I think they kind of feel the power of Excalibur. But I think I like that the emphasis is also on the fact that he really is sort of taken aback by Arthur's bravery in this moment, and it kind of reminds him of his honor as a knight. And I just think it's a really interesting moment to take a character who's very, goes from being very antagonistic to sort of, Arthur gaining his respect and admiration. And I think it's a wonderful moment, again, bringing back the Wagner music for it. I just, it is another one of those big moments in the film that I think works really well.
Great.
Okay, so now working towards the end of the film, a character that we haven't talked about is Percival, played by Paul Jeffrey, who very much drives the latter portion of the film. He almost takes over as protagonist for a while. And this is another case where I think it's kind of funny because this is another actor starting off playing the character much younger than he is.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure it fits completely. But again, as he plays the character as he grows older, I think he grows into the role really well. And, and he has to carry the movie throughout the Grail quest and, with his confrontations with Morgana and Mordred and the moments where he's hanging, from the tree and he's having the visions of the Grail and going, and again, like this movie is so impressionistic and just, not strictly in sort of realism, that I think it works really well. And like when he finally gets the Grail, you're not entirely sure like exactly how he returns to Camelot, or does he just appear there he has the Grail, or did he actually travel back? I like the fact that this part of the film is kind of just open to interpretation in that way. And
he teleported,
yeah, I think he does but I think the actor does a really great job, particularly with this portion of the film and driving through to the end of the movie. And in a lot of ways, he's reminiscent of Arthur, particularly as he's portrayed early on, sort of running through the woods, not too dissimilar from Arthur himself. And I think one of my favorite moments of sort of symmetry is that when Arthur at the end of the movie tells him to throw the sword back into the lake, when Percival draws the sword out of Mordred's body, it's very evocative of Arthur pulling the sword from the stone.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was done so well. And yeah, so I think it's a tall order to sort of take over the movie, 2/3 of the way through. And I think he does a really admirable job of that.
I was going to also say, by the way, the actor who played Percival, he apparently auditioned originally for Arthur. Did you guys hear that? And so, maybe he wasn't, I don't know, he probably wasn't maybe as well known. I'm not really sure what the reason for it was. But anyway, so he thought, oh, he was really disappointed that he wasn't going to be in the movie. And then I guess he was out having dinner with his agent, and his agent said, oh, John wants to meet with you, and then gave him this role instead. And I said, in some ways, it's wonderful because he actually, like you say, he kind of almost takes over as the protagonist, and then sort of fulfills Arthur's wishes.
Yes. Times we see that a lot, where actors that were up for like the main role ultimately end up getting cast in the supportive part, either as like, supporting character or as the villain in certain cases. And I can definitely see a world where this actor, Paul Joffrey, could have played Arthur. But I think that what he imbues with Percival is kind of that kind of pure spirit that makes him one of the knights who ultimately proves, to be true and loyal, and who does not lose his way, even though it's hard, and who ultimately, proves himself worthy of being the one to find the Holy Grail. And it's telling that, he's essentially comes into Arthur's service through Lancelot, who kind of had that role for the beginning part of the movie, and then unfortunately Lancelot, because of everything that happened with Guinevere, loses his way and is no longer in Arthur's active service, and so Percival kind of steps up, and he is the one who really is, as Gwen said, he basically becomes the protagonist for much of the, the third act of the movie. And yes, there are definitely moments where in the early going, I noticed that he was an older actor playing younger. I had joked about there were certain moments where I have a hard time separating these movies from previous depictions of that they've been in, and I will acknowledge I have one of those moments when Percival is trying to chase down the rabbit. And I was basically like, dude, what are you doing? That's the killer rabbit of Gaborg. Man, don't touch that thing.
It's so funny.
But and then obviously with the Holy Grail vision quest.
Yeah, when did that movie come out? When did Holy Grail come out?
That came out before this. That was in.
Okay.
We almost made it through the whole thing without a Monty Python reference.
It was Gwen, you may have hoped that was going to be the case, but it was impossible. It was literally impossible. And you're lucky that I haven't made more than one Monty Python reference.
Yeah, don't do the thing that everybody does. I swear to God, I will kick you out, even though you're co-host.
I don't even know what you're talking about. I was thinking about the fact that when Arthur is going to face Lancelot, there was a part of my brain like, oh, he's about to face the Black Knight. 'Tis but a scratch. But
did he do this thing?
Yeah.
No, it's getting dangerously close.
Oh, okay.
So regardless, I do think that the actual moment where Percival, at first he finds he comes into contact with the Grail, and then he recognizes that no, something's wrong, something's off, and he backs out of that vision castle, and then later when he returns, and at this time he's wiser and he's learned his lesson, and he has, I think, the line where he talks about what is the secret of the Grail? Who does it serve? And it serves you, Lord and King Arthur. And have you found the secret that I have lost? Yes, you and the land are one. But I also want to just shout out one of my favorite moments of subtle, funny background acting from Paul Joffrey is the moment after he delivers the Grail back to Arthur, and Arthur is restored, and he hops up and gives his big speech. And we see in the background, Percival is basically just sitting by the throne. He's just like...
He's exhausted.
He's exhausted. It's like, I've been on this Grail quest for 20 years. Because I maybe get a good night's sleep before we go up and have to fight again.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's obviously so much more I'd like to dive into with Percival, but we're short on time. I want to wrap this up, so because I know you guys have to get out of here. But this another moment I just want to highlight is right before he finds the Grail, the rebirth sequence in the water after he has his run-in with Lancelot, and he falls down the water and he's shedding his armor, and and some Wagner music, which is actually from Sir Parsifal, which is Percival, and so it's a fitting piece of music.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that that's just a beautiful sequence. And then he finds the Grail, and that moment, Jared, when he's like, I remember when I first saw them, I'm like, is Percival upset in that moment? Does he think that they're gonna go off to their death now? But no, I think he's just exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's been off for 20 goddamn years looking for the Grail, and he's been through all kinds of hell. He's probably like, can we take a nap? Can I take a nap first before we go?
Exactly.
But yeah, and then we touched earlier on the scene with Guinevere and Arthur, so we don't need to revisit that. I'd love to dive some more into Merlin's return and the scene with Morgana. How many more minutes do you have, Heidi, before you think you need to check out?
Well, you guys can stay. Would you rather do that? Just like I can go and then.
Well, be done by 6:30 as well, so we're probably wrapping up.
Yeah.
Let's just wrap it up.
Okay, sorry guys.
I'll just say
it's 9.
Great.
Jared, where are you? How come it's 6:30? Are you on the?
I'm on the West Coast, but I usually have dinner with my family on Sunday. So.
Okay, because it's after 9 for me. That's what I was wondering. Okay.
So yeah, I'll just say that's a great scene of acting, and I love how Merlin tricks Morgana by appealing to her pride, and I just love basically he pulls the same trick on her that she pulled on him, and he's like, but be careful, it can affect your beauty. So I love that, and and the scene where we're gonna wrap up, but I can't go this stream without his pointing out his line when he is talking to Arthur in a dream, and Arthur says, "Are you a dream?" He goes, "A dream to some, a nightmare to others."
It's like the Ghost of Christmas Past or something.
Yeah. So yeah. Oh God. This whole stream could have been just quoting Merlin's lines. I'm kind of impressed that it wasn't. But needless to say, Nicol Williamson crushed it this entire movie. And and then we got the final battle sequence. I don't think that much, given we're wrapping up, don't need to say too much about that, but I'll just, obviously the imagery again is just so great with, when Arthur and Mordred are impaling each other and with the red sun in the background, it's just it's so amazing. And I love that shot of Arthur when he's above Mordred and he drives the Excalibur down into Mordred. I just think that that's such a cool shot, and yeah, I like the fact that again, this is such a movie that is not adhering to traditional what you would normally do in a film. The fact that the film has Arthur send Percival off to throw the sword in the lake, and Percival decides not to, comes back, and then Arthur sends him off again to go do it. And it's this is not something that in a sort of traditional modern day Hollywood movie, it would be oh, don't you just send him off the one time? But I like the fact that it's doing what's sort of dictated by the story and the characters, and again, just the way the Lady of the Light's hand comes up out of the water, and you know, and giving that full symmetry to the story, and then Arthur being carried off to Avalon, which again might confuse you if you don't know the Arthurian legend. But I think that this story kind of assumes that you at least have some passing understanding of the legend, and so I think it's just a beautiful way to end the film. And
yeah, again, it kind of reminds me of Lord of the Rings a little bit. I was saying to my husband, the ending had that same feeling, which I'm assuming Tolkien sort of took from some Arthurian legend. I'm assuming, I'm not 100% sure, but just some of the things that exist in this fantasy feel like they might have been like at least dabbled in. I'm sure George Martin was influenced by Arthurian legend as well, because he's a huge Tolkien fan too. Actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah. This is a draw comparison to Arthur's farewell in another King Arthur movie, which is First Night, when he's being sailed off into the water, and then they fire the flaming arrow to set,
they do like a Viking burial type of thing. Yeah. Well, that's what I was at first when I saw this. I was like, is this like a Viking burial? But then I looked it up and I realized he was going off to Avalon. So
I think, and again, like, you could save this for if we ever do a First Night stream, but like Jerry Goldsmith's music for that finale just absolutely kills it. But yeah, so that takes the end of the film. I'll leave it to you guys for any final comments on either any of that or anything else throughout the film.
No, I thought that the ending was very effective. Again, this being based on Le Morte d'Arthur, like, and actually showing his final confrontation with Mordred, and the kind of the moment of course he allows himself to be impaled on the spear so that he can get close enough to drive the sword into Mordred's heart. The moment like earlier in the film where he had basically offered Mordred his love, and Mordred basically spat at him. That's the one thing I don't want from you. And so here he recognizes, yes, even though this is my son, I need to end him. And the Percival moment, I that got me too, Gwen, when like he didn't throw the sword in the lake. I'm like, did they just not shoot that? That's a weird choice. but of course, it ends up being more of like a kind of like, he's like, I know you said throw this all-powerful sword in the lake, but are you sure? This kind of seems like a useful thing to keep around. And I was like, yes, I'm sure. And then, of course, I love the fact that when Percival actually does it, and then he comes back, and Arthur has already, started to descend off into the mists of time, and that's kind of the final shot that we get. So, yes, it definitely again evokes that whole bit of like this part of the story is passing into legend, and at some point the promise is that, of course, that the legend will come again, and when that will be, who knows?
Like a once and future king.
Exactly. Perhaps.
Yeah, no, I just love that. And yeah, I love that. I use that line to tease the stream. One day a king shall come and the sword will rise again. It's just a very beautiful thought. And then going back to, Arthur says to Guinevere, the brotherhood was a beginning that must not be forgotten, cannot be forgotten, and because I may live again. And I think that's I've been thinking a lot about that, in relations to like other stories I've been watching about, like sort of waging a fight that for the moment it might seem that it's ending in a sort of tragedy, but also it's giving hope to the future that such a moment will come again, and that other people will rise up, and so I think it's a very hopeful ending, but also a tragic ending as well. So. But yeah, Heidi, any final comments before we?
Well, one thing I was going to just say that one of the things I really enjoyed about the movie, like the visuals are just absolutely stunning, as I mentioned, but I was just looking at that last shot, like where it's purple, like each sort of section of the movie, like each little, I guess you would call it, act of the movie, like how they all each have sort of a color, and I just love that. Like, and I don't think that's something that we see very often. That it just gives the feeling of the movie during those particular points, and it's sort of he's sort of telling, like it's a nonverbal way to tell us the story. I think this is a lot of it. Like it'd be interesting to watch it without dialogue or something like that. Just watch it as a visual medium with the music, perhaps. So yeah, just an absolute beautiful cinema. What is it? What do they call it? Cinematography. There's a name for it. Cinematic, like the name of your channel, Gwen. Experience, and obviously, absolutely adored the costumes. And the music, and then of course, and the acting. I thought was really, really good. The acting and the writing, but on a visual level, for me, this was a huge success. This movie.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that about like the look of the film, sort of, and the different chapters having different looks. That may be another way.
That's what I was trying to say.
That may be another way in which Peter Jackson was inspired, because each section of the Lord of the Rings films kind of has their own unique looks depending on the location or even the different films. So yeah. Yeah, no, just closing out, I'll say that I'm really glad we talked about this film. I've been looking forward to doing this discussion for a while, and it's funny to think that I've been on basically like a good, I guess, 25-year journey with this movie, pretty much, where I've like my viewpoint on it has sort of evolved and changed over time, and I think it's kind of cool because it's a sign of like how I've changed and evolved over the years, and I have a great love for Arthurian legend, and these stories, and yeah, I would, and so I kind of, this is the closest I think I've ever felt to this film, and so I'm kind of satisfied to let it sit as a sort of singular piece of work for a while, but at the same time I am sort of intrigued by the notion that somebody could come along and maybe do a multi-season series about the King Arthur legends. I sort of fantasized for a long while that Ridley Scott would do something with the Arthurian legend, but yeah, we'll see.
In the vein of like Robin Hood, in that sort of grounded sort of Robin Hood style, or
Gladiator and
Gladiator, yeah,
Kingdom of Heaven, those kinds of things, and but maybe it'll be somebody completely different, and and they'll lend their own style to it. I'm kind of over the revisionist takes on King Arthur, even though like this in itself is, even though it's very much closely connected to the original legends, it still is doing a lot that is unique to this version of the film. The sort of mystical qualities to it, I think, are really dialed up, and like Boorman did a lot of stuff like combining the sword and the stone and the sword from the lake into one sword, which in Le Morte d'Arthur, they're different swords. For some reason, they're both named Excalibur, but they're different swords.
It's so weird.
And so it made sense to like bring those together. And I think that now, because of this film, people just naturally assume that the swords are one and the same. And that's something Boorman brought to the legend. And so again, I feel like this is a very important part of the canon of King Arthur's stories, and so yeah. But I would love to see something of this ilk, done in a modern context, probably at this point for television, because it would allow them to do something different now that television productions have bigger budgets and they could really dive into the individual stories, and not try and run through it all in 2.5 hours. So I hold out hope for something like that in the future. But in the meantime, this is a pretty damn fine version of the Arthur legend, and we have a couple of them. We're gonna do Jared, we'll do a stream on Sword in the Stone at some point here. We have to. So, but yeah, so that's all I have to say. Any final comments, Jared?
No, I'm very glad that I finally got to see this movie, because I knew that you were really excited to talk about it, Gwen. I loved having you here to talk about it as well, Heidi. You are obviously welcome back anytime. And as you said, we will be, I'm sure, talking about House of the Dragon now that we have an official premiere date. June 21st is what's coming.
That's very exciting.
Yes, but yeah, this was a lot of fun, and like I said, it's always nice when one of us can, even though we usually talk about movies on this channel that we've both already seen and both know we love. It's always fun when one of us can introduce the other to a new flavor of cinema, and this is definitely one that I think was well worth checking out.
Or as I like to call it, me twisting Jared's arm into watching a movie I want to talk about.
Yeah.
No,
really. We do more of that than the reverse. Although, like, I will always, count on the fact that, like, for instance, I got you to watch the Before trilogy, which are movies that are very near and dear to me.
Yeah, and that does bring to mind the fact that we're overdue to switch it up now. I need to see something that you would recommend, because it's been a while since we did those discussions. So
we'll see.
You're owed some of them.
I have a few ideas.
But we've been talking so much Star Wars, and we both love Star Wars.
I mean, like, that's the thing. Like, I basically, like, I almost consider those one for me, even though we both love Star Wars. So.
Oh, that's true. We talked about Rise of Skywalker, which I would not have done without.
Well, and I was insisting on that, and we got to make it one of our longest streams in the history of the channel. Which, again, like, I think that's great, and that was definitely one like, that's one that I, that fills me up on my quotient for a while.
Yeah, that was a great discussion. Okay, cool. Well, we'll wrap things up so we can get out of here. And yeah, and anybody who's been watching or comes to the stream later, thank you. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. We'll be returning to Star Wars stuff next week with the last 4 episodes of Maul, Shadow Lord, the last 2 episodes of which drop tonight. So looking forward to that.
They're already out in certain territories, so spoilers are everywhere. So tread carefully.
Oh, of course they are. Yeah. But yeah, thank you both for this discussion. It was absolutely wonderful. Heidi, it's always great talking to you.
Oh, thanks so much for including me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we'd love to have you back soon. And I don't know.
And I want to have you on my channel too, Jared and Gwen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know my schedule's going to be a little weird for the House of the Dragon stuff, but I would like to at least make it on for a couple of them.
That would be
at
awesome.
the very least. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you guys next week for Maul, Shadow Lord. Until then, have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.